We start this story by meeting Cecil. This handsome and stylish boy right here is anything but ordinary. Apparently, this kid is a total prodigy in pretty much any field you can think of. Just to give you an idea, he made an incredible mathematical discovery when he was only 10 years old. It's funny, because for most people, that would be the biggest achievement of their life. But for Cecil, it wasn't. Getting the answers just by looking at the board is way too easy for him. Actually, his whole life is just too easy. And when something's too easy, it also gets really boring. For Cecil, life is basically monotonous and dull. Or at least it was, until he met a certain girl. One day, a girl showed up at his house saying she was the villain. Her main mission was to separate him from the heroine, and that way she herself would end up being defeated at the end of the story. When she finishes talking, our protagonist realizes for the first time in his life that he's confused and doesn't understand anything she's saying. To help us understand the context a bit better, first we need to know that our protagonist is the crown prince of the kingdom of Alfasta, and the girl standing in front of him is his beloved fiancée, Bertia Evil Notice. That's one of the strangest names I've ever heard, but that doesn't matter. The thing is, that first interaction made Cecil interested in her. So as not to draw too much attention, he politely asks her to join him for some tea. That way he's left alone with her and Zeno, his personal valet, whom he gets along with very well. As you'd expect, Cecil, besides being very smart, is a super polite and calm boy. But that's kind of strange for a child, and our protagonist notices it. She asks if he's a reincarnated person. Cecil is confused, but gets interested. Zeno also knows the prince isn't normal. He's right, because the prince senses when Zeno is thinking badly of him. But putting that aside, our protagonist asks the girl directly what she's talking about. Because of that, Bertia has to tell him everything, since according to her, it's better that he knows. It turns out the girl has memories of her past life. She was born and raised in Japan, a place where dating games existed, and she was a huge fan of them. She spent all her time playing, until one day something strange happened. She had a shock, and when her memory returned, she realized she was in the world of one of those games. That's exactly why she knows the story of this world. For example, he's gonna end up falling in love with a noble lady who's his destined woman. Meanwhile, she's gonna be the villain who goes crazy and torments him nonstop. They were supposed to be engaged, but because of his anger, he breaks off the engagement and leaves her family in ruins. Feel the drama. But that doesn't make her sad or scary. In fact, she wants all of this to happen so he can be happy with his promised woman. It's true that her fate won't be pretty at all, but even so, she wants to make her exit in style because this girl wants to become a top-tier femme fatale. And again, Cecil curiously doesn't understand anything that's going on, but he doesn't really care whether she can actually see the future or just has a vivid imagination. What catches his attention is that she wants to become someone who fits into this story. That's why he asks what kind of femme fatale she wants to be. Bertia confidently replies she'll be strong, noble, and beautiful, unlike her current self. Our protagonist is hard on herself, realizing she doesn't match those words yet. This leaves Bertia dying of embarrassment as she realizes what's going on. That's exactly why she explains that in the game, she was destined to lose from the very beginning, so her looks didn't really matter that much. But that only applies to the Bertia from the original game. She tells the prince that he was her comfort when she used to hide away at home, and that's also why she wants him to be happy. So no matter what it takes, she's gonna become a pure and honest femme fatale. She plans to become the best version of herself and then come back. And after giving this huge speech, she runs off, leaving our poor protagonist even more confused. But he also keeps thinking about her, because she's interesting, has no manners, and everything she says is a mystery. That makes him want to watch the girl for a while longer, and if necessary, he'll guide or train her to follow the right path. This is strange for Zeno, because it seems like the prince is actually having fun. And it's true, our protagonist loves that all of this is so unpredictable. Since forever, he's been able to do any task on the first try. And like we said before, that makes everything boring, because without a real challenge, he never felt the true satisfaction of winning. But with this curious girl, now he has high expectations. From this moment on, about a year goes by. Cecil put an informant to keep an eye on Bertia since she ended up locking herself at home during all that time. Zeno gets worried, thinking something might have happened to her, but Cecil reassures him, saying they just need to wait a little longer. And that's how, a few days later, Bertia herself goes to visit the prince. But this time, she's really different. She lost weight and now knows how to behave like a proper lady. With that, our protagonist finds out that the reports were true. The girls spent all that time working out a lot. Now she's really proud because she's changed a lot and thinks the prince won't even recognize her, but she gets a little too excited, so her father asks her to calm down, saying she shouldn't act like that in front of the prince. But actually, our prince thinks she's really cute and tells her father that it's nice she acts her age. Being called cute makes Bertia super embarrassed, but she really likes it and even wants him to say it again. Her father, however, kills the mood right away. He explains that she shouldn't be fooled by appearances. That boy's eyes never smile, and he's incapable of appreciating cuteness. He's a very cold man. That's why she has to settle for her father's loving words and not this boy's. The prince finds this amusing because ironically it's her father who's the disrespectful one. But after a while, the two of them talk alone again, even though Zeno keeps snooping around nearby. Bertia didn't come alone. She brought a little fox named Kuro. She found it nearby, and it refused to leave her side. She brought it along as a failed disguise, but it didn't help her at all. And the reason for this conversation is that there's going to be a party soon. Bertia came to let the prince know that she will nobly fulfill her duty of being his companion. It's funny because she talks as if she's doing him a favor, but the prince also gets a little worried. So he warns her that it's better to keep this whole past life story a secret because you never know when it could cause trouble if someone finds out. To help her understand, he says that a villain full of weaknesses wouldn't have a good level. This excites Bertha because she wants to become a top-tier villain, repeating that she'll do whatever it takes to be a noble and beautiful flower of evil. Also, Bertha is happy to celebrate the prince's birthday, as that's what the party's for. But then she stops to think and realizes that something bad is about to happen. Cecil is about to turn 11, and that means Bertha will be turning 10. Knowing this sends the girl into a panic. According to the story, her mother's gonna pass away. Apparently, an epidemic will break out in the summer, and right before her birthday, her mother will lose her life because of this illness. And the worst part is, it's not just her mother who's in danger. The cure for this disease is a certain herb, and they won't learn how to use it for many years, which will cause a huge drop in the population. Bertha's father will become desperate trying to find a way to help his wife, even going so far as to kneel before the king, but in the end, absolutely none of it will work. Cecile analyzes the situation. If this is really going to happen in a year, there's still time to save her mother and these people. The problem is that Bertha also cares about the game's story. She wanted to stick to the script, but Cecile asks the real question, what matters more to her? Her mother's life or just a story she knows? The answer's pretty obvious to Bertha. She loves her mother and wants to protect her, but she's afraid of how that would affect the prince. But Cecile tries to calm her down, offers her a towel to dry her tears, and tells her that whenever they have a problem, they'll figure out how to solve it together. That's what being her fiancé is for. Then we jump ahead another year. She's venting to the prince, but then remembers her manners and tries to calm down. Cecile tries to understand her frustration. It's because today is exactly her 10th birthday. In the end, she wasn't able to prepare for the epidemic, and all that stubborn Cecile wrote in his letters to her was that everything would be fine. So the poor thing didn't know what to do and suffered all this time. Our protagonist apologizes for that, but honestly, everything would be fine. Bertha, however, is still confused, but the epidemic never came, and her mother is fine. Besides that, she tried to gather as much medicine as she could, but it wasn't enough. It got to a point where she just didn't know what to think anymore, and that's when our hero starts to explain what happened. Just as she had predicted, the epidemic really did happen. But to make a long story short, our protagonist took the information she gave him, figured out what the disease was, and made the medicine himself. Thanks to that, they treated the sick immediately. Hearing this, she's in shock and confused. She needs more details because it's overwhelming. So Cecile takes her out for a walk to calm her down and starts telling her what he's been up to since she mentioned her mother. First, his status as a prince made things a lot easier. He had access to a huge library where he learned about the moon leaf, which was the key to making the medicine. After he more or less understood how it worked, he was able to grow the leaf without any trouble. And it wasn't just a little plant, he grew a huge tree. Then he went to Bertha and asked about her mother's symptoms. She didn't know why, but she helped him identify the disease more easily. From there, he talked to several specialists on the subject and ended up developing the medicine on his own. Zeno was shocked at how easily he managed to create it. But the journey didn't end there. Since it was a pandemic, our protagonist had to get the adults to work, so he got involved with important people in the field. But he was manipulating everyone without them realizing it. He made them casually interested in the disease, which led to a lot of research. He talked about the medicine and everything else, but in a very indirect way, so no one would know what he was up to. Until he got to the point where the researchers themselves, on their own, predicted the arrival of the disease and decided to take action. He didn't really like this part, especially because he left too many obvious clues, and even then it took people a while to catch on. Zeno even teased him about his bad luck, like any good friend would, but at least everything worked out in the end. They found the first infected patient, and the doctor was able to treat him successfully. To be honest with himself, Cecil was surprised to see that what Bertha said actually happened. After all, it was normal not to fully believe her story. Either way, it was still a really fun and new situation for him. For example, as perfect as he is, he couldn't guide the doctor properly and even ended up making Bertha worried. He thinks this happened because of his bad habits. Like, he expects normal people to figure things out as quickly as he does. Or that thing where he sends letters saying everything's fine without giving any explanation. In the middle of these thoughts, Bertha interrupts again because she still finds it really strange how he did all that. For Cecil, it was pretty simple. He couldn't just ignore his fiancée's concerns. And that sounds lovely, of course, but Bertha wants to know how an 11-year-old boy managed to do so many things. According to Cecil, it's because he's the crown prince. He doesn't just have access to a lot of information, but also to a bunch of influential people, so it wasn't that hard for him. But nope, Zeno, who was eavesdropping in the back, thinks that a normal prince would never do something like that. And it's amazing to know that our protagonist realizes when Zeno thinks that, since he notices his presence but doesn't say anything. For Bertha, it becomes clear how he managed it, and she understands why in her world this boy was called the android prince. Cecil tries to get her to finally calm down, since in the end, no one lost their life and everything turned out fine. She agrees that that's the good part of the story, even though she still finds everything very complicated. But the surprises didn't end there. Today just so happens to be Bertha's birthday, and Cecil says he has a gift made especially for her. It looks like an ordinary necklace, but it's actually a universal antidote. When he was researching the illness, he found a really interesting book in the royal library. The book was really well hidden and even had a riddle that almost no one could solve, but he managed to do it. He tells her that it's a remedy because as his future wife, it's possible someone might try something against her life. So the necklace also works as a kind of amulet, and right then he goes over and puts it on her. Little Bertha gets really embarrassed, but she's also super happy and grateful. At that moment, she swears on her own name and on the necklace that she will set the story right to repay the huge favor he did for her. And how is she going to be that? Simple, by becoming a fantastic villain. To start, she's going to make her father go back to his evil ways. Cecil tries to say that none of this is necessary, but she wants to make sure he gets his happy ending no matter what. So no matter what Cecil says, the girl is totally determined. Well, time keeps passing and passing until we reach the point where we're at Ron Academy, but this time the student council president, our beloved protagonist, welcomes the new members, and among them is his dear fiancée, Bertha, because she's also just started her academic life at this place. A little later, in the student council room, you can see the members talking about Bertha. Charles, who I could call Carlos, but since that name's already taken, I'll call him Miguel. Miguel suits him well. Well, Miguel compliments our protagonist, saying he has a very refined and interesting fiancée, pointing out that she was the center of attention during the ceremony. And here we meet another guy named Xiao Wen. And if he looks like the protagonist, it's because he's his younger brother. He also compliments Bertha's beauty, saying he hopes to get along really well now that she's going to be his sister-in-law. And another guy named Cram, who is just as emo as he looks, says he doesn't think he'll be able to handle someone as energetic as Bertha. And lastly, a man named Bald speaks up, saying our protagonist has some pretty amazing legs, but he doesn't mean it in a bad way. He's a martial artist and loves working out, so he admires her because he knows she must have worked really hard to be the way she is. Miguel says that can't be true because she's a lady and wouldn't do that kind of activity. But Cecil, in his mind, knows that Bald is absolutely right, and everyone is definitely going to be surprised when they see that Bertha doesn't fit the image they have of her. In that same place, Carlos is also there, and McGill gets really interested to know if he already knows Bertha, since the two of them apparently share the same last name. Because yeah, Carlos was adopted by some of Bertha's distant relatives. But he answers no, since they share a name, but you can't just know a stranger. Though the conversation's interesting, Sino tells Cecil it's time to go. The prince tells the others he'll walk around the academy with Bertia, really surprising Miguel, as Cecil never cared for such things. He suggests everyone go together, and Sean agrees, leaving Cecil no choice but to end up agreeing. But on the way there, something pretty curious happens. They run into Enderon, who's playing and wandering around there. Because of that, Cecil keeps staring at her intently and then talks privately with Carlos. Even so, they keep going, and when they get to Bertia, she gets really worked up seeing all of them. Bertia is also with the small group, but one of them really stands out, Kuro. She's in her human form, but regular people can't see her tail or her little ears. Bertia, on the other hand, is super surprised to see all the important characters gathered together. In that same place, we meet Johanna, who is Cecil's cousin, and she's actually interested in talking to him, saying that Bertia was really anxious for him to arrive. By the way, she was totally charmed because she thought he was adorable. And there's something funny too. They look a lot alike because both of them love messing with Bertia's reactions. And speaking of her, Bertia tells our protagonist that she made some new friends, but she calls them her henchmen, just to sound a little more like a villain. Of course, Cecil gets it, but he explains to her that she can't call her friends that in public. But Johanna steps in and says that actually they formed a Bertia fan club. And this group is made up of her and the other girls. The girl with green hair is named Cynthia Sornelis, the one with orange hair is Silica Lunia, and the one with slightly brown hair is Anne Cogareth. It's not an official group or anything like that, but they're people who want to protect and support Bertia because they all agree that she needs to be cared for and guided. Which annoys her because she feels like they're treating her like a child. But putting that aside, Cecil has something for her. Sino lets them know it's time to give it to her, so they go talk in private. There, he gives her some blue roses that he got especially for her to celebrate her entrance into the academy. Bertia is deeply happy, but not for the reason they think. She thinks they're giving her this too, because just like in her game, Cecil and the heroine have already met. But she noticed the color differs from the original story. She only tells Cecil this last part. He says he bred this rose himself because he knows she likes that color. So she hesitates to accept them, as they're even more special than she imagined. But then she looks closely at the roses and just can't help but accept them. They have the same color as her prince's eyes, and are just as beautiful. But she said that without thinking and gets super embarrassed. The scene melts the hearts of everyone present. And even though Bertia tries to hide her feelings, Miguel and the others start to notice her true personality. And on a new day inside the kingdom's castle, Marquis Noches talks to Cecil about his daughter. He's really worried. He tells her that his little girl, so beautiful, so lovely, and so pure, is completely determined to follow the path of evil. So much so that she even wrote a detailed manual on how to become a villain. The Marquis shows the writing, and Cecil is impressed by how much his fiancée knows about economics and embezzlement. Even so, even though the whole thing's pretty bad, our protagonist tries to calm the guy down and suggests that it's probably just a rebellious phase because of her age, and that it'll pass with time. But the father's worry doesn't go away, because soon Bertia will be introduced to high society, and he's afraid her behavior might cause problems. Cecil promises he'll be by her side the whole time to keep things under control, but he also makes it clear that if something interesting happens, he'll just let it play out for his own amusement. The long-awaited day of the presentation finally arrives, and both Cecil and Bertia stand out among everyone as a flawless couple. The prince is surprised to see that his beloved has started behaving like a refined lady. Now, she's the kind who lifts her pinky when drinking tea, and on top of that, she's not causing any embarrassment, at least for now. In the middle of the event, Viscount Riley approaches, excited to see her. He already knows Bertia, and his overly familiar attitude catches our protagonist's attention. The prince notices Bertia whispering something in the guy's ear, which irritates him, and right away he grabs her hand to pull her away from the guy. When they're alone, he directly asks if Riley's the one who helped her with that manual, and she, a bit embarrassed, admits that he is. Then the prince demands to know what her relationship is with this man. And she, through tears, confesses that according to the story she knows, the Viscount is one of the people responsible for leading her father down the wrong path. That's why she decided to get close to the guy herself, to earn his trust and uncover his schemes. But even though she approached him of her own free will, he reveals a really awful truth. Riley is a degenerate who is attracted to minors. That's why the prince wants her to honestly say if this Viscount ever did anything inappropriate, and maybe Bertia didn't even notice because she was so caught up in her own plans. But when she tries to remember, she realizes that yes, something did happen. She goes into shock right then and her heart breaks. Cecil tries to calm her down and promises that she'll personally take care of this matter. Then the prince asks if she contacted any other people related to this so-called dark fate. She says no, but mentions that there are still two important figures left, Count Camorno and Baron Saggio. That's when Cecil insists that she not repeat the mistake she made with Riley, but Bertia ignores the warning and promises she'll just be more careful next time. Cause yes, the girl is way too stubborn and wants to stick to her plan. Then, when our protagonist tries to talk to the Marquis, he says that Riley, Camorno, and Saggio are dangerous individuals who will try to manipulate the guy. He also admits that Riley took advantage of his daughter, which obviously enrages the father. Taking advantage of this, Cecil suggests a plan. All of this will be kept secret so Bertia doesn't interfere, and the Marquis will have to act as a spy to gather evidence against these men, because according to the story, a story that Bertia knows, they're going to visit him frequently. The problem is that Cecil will soon be moving to the Realm Academy, so he won't be able to help directly. 6 months go by. Our protagonist was wandering around the castle bored out of his mind, but then Bertia comes running in and announces that a baby is on the way. The super quirky girl says it way too loud and everyone hears. That's why our protagonist gets super embarrassed, but he keeps his cool. He tries to get Bertia to talk by herself so the others will understand she's not talking about the two of them. Bertia realizes the mess she just made and gets really embarrassed, telling everyone that they haven't even had their first kiss yet. And just to be clear, she explains that she's talking about her dear mother, because apparently her mom is the one who's pregnant. So the misunderstanding gets cleared up, but our protagonist still plays it safe and gives everyone a threatening look so they don't start spreading weird rumors. After that, he walks her to the exit to escort her to the carriage. Bertia feels pretty embarrassed about what just happened, but he honestly assures her that he really enjoys her company. And maybe he's joking, maybe he's not, but he says that if they were completely alone, he might even consider giving her their first kiss. Obviously, the poor girl gets way too nervous and has no idea what to do, but the prince is having a blast. He thinks it's hilarious. But he also starts to feel a lot more confident and begins calling her by her first name, since up until then he'd only used her last name. And out of nowhere, another 6 months go by, and now Cecil visits Bertia's family, where she introduces the new heir, Ines. In particular, she explains that the original story is really changing, and that's not normal. In the version she knew, her mother wouldn't even be alive to begin with. And a relative named Kurt Ken, who I'll just call Kurt for obvious reasons, was adopted as the heir. But since her mother is still alive, now Ines has that role. But even so, she believes she can still play the role of the villain and make Cecil end up with the heroine, especially since the heroine also has several suitors, and depending on the circumstances, she might end up engaged to one or another, which was really important and something she should have told our protagonist a long time ago. But he also doesn't see any reason to keep going with this plan, since his relationship with her is going well. But then she gets flustered and tries to warn him about something serious that could happen if she doesn't follow this destiny, but decides to stay quiet. Uncertain, the prince asks about the other candidates, and she mentions several important names. She also explains that all of them, including our protagonist, fall in love with the heroine at the same time in the original story, but because of the changes happening now, things are heading in a different direction. And Bertie is afraid that if the story tries to correct itself, Ines could be affected too. In other words, her little brother might be in danger. That's why Cecil promises that he'll guide events to prevent any harm. With that same goal in mind, the prince travels to Kurt's village because, yeah, now I don't like Kurt anymore. Now I'm calling him Carlos. And first, he puts the guy's character to the test by asking about the local ruler, who's known for having a terrible reputation. But Carlos answers honestly, saying that he's not a bad person, he's just someone who, for some reason, can't express himself without cursing. Terrible support. And our protagonist values that honesty, so he offers him an opportunity to become his ally. And Carlos wasn't expecting that. He's really moved too, because he's gonna end up living with a rich family while doing his job, which he doesn't even know what it is yet. So Carlos obviously accepts with gratitude and swears absolute loyalty. The next day, Bertia finds out about it and is really happy because our protagonist, her father, and Carlos have formed a kind of secret alliance to take down the villain's plans. But Bertia also forgot another little detail, which is to avoid a reverse harem at all costs. Our protagonist didn't really understand what she was talking about, so Bertie explains that basically the heroine would have several men at her feet at the same time. But for Cecil, that would be impossible, literally, because of the kingdom's laws. That just couldn't happen. But Bertia says that this could also happen through magic, even though she's never seen anything like that before. But the prince clarifies that in their world, magic as such doesn't exist. That's true, but there are light spirits, and to explain this, he first talks about her pet, Kuro. Bertia remembers that she found him in a forest and that Kuro healed one of her wounds, but she doesn't think anything else happened. But Cecil explains that this very act turned him into her chosen spirit. And by the way, he reveals something really interesting. Celino is also his spirit. Bertie is really surprised by this and gets a bunch of books to learn about these beings, but she's not in the mood to study. On the other hand, they also show a girl with pink hair who, besides that, has a pet she calls Pia. When the little creature runs away, she chases after it and bumps into a guy who gets annoyed at her recklessness. But then Pia uses its power to make the guy fall in love. Then he introduces himself as Lucatin and also asks for her name. And that's when we get a surprise, because she introduces herself as Enderon, who turns out to be the heroine of the game. As they're walking away, Bertia casually asks Cecil if he saw a girl playing with a bird in the hallway. He says yes, but mentions that he thought she seemed a little suspicious, so he asks Carlos to let a teacher know. This worries Bertia, because things aren't going the way they did in the game. In her version, the prince was supposed to be captivated by Enderon, so much so that he would give her one of the flowers that was meant for Bertia. That's why she asks if he didn't feel anything when he saw the girl. But he stops, thinks carefully, and realizes that he only felt that spark when he actually met her, specifically when he saw a crazy girl carrying a fox around like it was a scarf. But this makes Bertia worried, because she's changing the course of events again. And that makes Cecil sad, because he thinks his gift didn't please her. But Bertia explains that this gesture made her really happy, and since it's already happened and there's nothing she can do, she wants to enjoy the moment. But it seems like Cecil isn't really convinced by that. The next day, our protagonist sets up a meeting with Johanna to ask about the group of admirers, specifically if there's any threat against Bertia. At first, Johanna says everything's fine, but Cecil presses her, revealing that he knows she's also been investigating his little brother, because apparently she has an obsession, since he's such a pure and adorable kid. In fact, seeing the kind of brother she has, she can hardly believe they share the same blood.
In the end, she ends up giving him the names of people who might want to harm Bertia. Many of them are men who hate Cecil, and others are women who are really jealous of Bertia. And among them, you can see that Enderon is on the list. Our protagonist calmly analyzes the situation and thinks that things are starting to get really interesting. But Johanna doesn't like this, because she genuinely wants to protect Bertia, and it bothers her that he's so carefree. But he manipulates her a little, saying that he really trusts the group's protection and also Johanna's abilities, since they think very much alike. But deep down, he also trusts Bertie a lot, especially because he himself encouraged her to study a lot about spirits. And in fact, Kuro, who is her spirit, is really good at defending herself with light spirits. Anyway, after that, he goes to meet Bertia, and he's pretty curious, because she's never usually this excited. She was the one who invited him. And when he gets there, he doesn't find her, but he sees Enderon sleeping in the distance. That's why he immediately realizes what she's planning to do. And he also sees Bertie hiding really well nearby. So he tries to play along, pretending he's waiting for the girl. But he never expected Bertia to scream because a caterpillar crawled onto her head. Of course, Cecil runs over to help, but Bertia tries to force an encounter with Enderon. And by the way, Enderon is off in the distance yelling and yelling to get everyone's attention. In fact, at one point, she even calls our protagonist a villain, which doesn't really make sense, since she shouldn't know what Bertia's role is. In the end, our protagonist manages to convince Bertia to leave by promising her some sweets. Meanwhile, Enderon is visibly very annoyed. But even so, on another day, she tries to bring the two of them together again. She arranges for him to meet in a classroom. And even though Bertia already knows it's a lie, she wants to see what will happen. When she realizes it's Enderon and another student, she accidentally closes the door from the outside. Enderon tries to manipulate the situation and make him believe they've already gone on a date before. She talks about a bunch of things that never happened, like how the prince gave her a flower, but our protagonist never did that, even though she truly believes it. Even so, Cecil just stays quiet and stares at her, while also glancing at the spirit that's turned into a bird. But he doesn't want to waste time there, so he simply escapes through the window, leaving Enderon completely shocked because she doesn't want to be left alone. Even so, our protagonist tells a teacher to go check on her. And that might be really funny at first, but from here, another year goes by. Cecil tells Bertia that she hasn't stopped trying to set him up with Enderon, and in return, she asks how those meetings have been going. He replies that so far they haven't even had a formal introduction like nobles usually do. On the other hand, Bertia doesn't understand how the protagonist isn't falling in love with the one who should also be the main character. Even without meaning to, she ends up admitting that she's been manipulating situations so the two of them always run into each other. And Cecil already knew that, but he takes the opportunity to pretend he's really annoyed and then really distressed, explaining to his fiancée that he already has his own plans and that's why he's keeping his distance from her. And that makes Bertia delude herself, because she knows he could have everything perfectly planned out, since obviously he would never let his golden lady slip away. And then our protagonist replies that that's just too obvious. He puts in effort every day so that his beautiful lady never escapes, even though it's clear he's talking about Bertia. But Bertia gets way too comfortable with that. And even though Cecil has lately been loving to have fun watching Bertia, there's also a feeling he gets every time he acts like this, one he can't quite explain. The only thing he knows is that there's something in his chest that really bothers him.
As an extra detail, Seno also gives our protagonist an investigation about the clubs, more specifically about the fan clubs. And he says that actually there are a bunch of them, but these clubs have something interesting. They're all made up of women, and these women know that our protagonist has a very dark and manipulative side, but for some reason that excites them a lot. Right off the bat, we get a small glimpse into little Miguel's childhood. He was there, paying attention to his older brother, who was talking to a really pretty girl. His brother says he's gonna step out for a moment, which Miguel finds odd since the guy's official fiancée was supposed to arrive that very day. But the only thing his brother does is ask Miguel to look after the girl. And with that, he simply turns his back and leaves. Miguel then goes straight over to talk to the young lady who was waiting, and that girl was Anne. Feel the drama. Our protagonist was left speechless. He barely laid eyes on her and was already smitten. Without thinking twice, he introduces himself as the youngest son and asks if he could keep her company, which she immediately agreed to. Meanwhile, besides Bertia trying to set up our protagonist with this woman all the time, she's also super focused on his potential assistants. According to her, the mission now is to play Cupid for love. Our protagonist doesn't get it at first, so he asks her to explain. She says she's thought a lot about what to do to make sure he ends up with the heroine. This is already starting to get on our protagonist's nerves a bit because she's way too focused on this. But he keeps listening. Her big fantastic idea? Make the characters from the other routes find amazing partners so they won't even have time to look at the heroine. That's what she meant by playing Cupid. She's totally hyped to get started, and the first targets are Balti and Sindiev. Interestingly, the two are already engaged, but it seems like they barely know each other. After giving the warning, Bertia simply leaves the room, but as soon as she steps through the door, she runs right into Anne. She notices the girl looks a bit worried and asks what's wrong. Anne dodges the question, says it's nothing, and walks away, but you can see she's holding a small letter in her hands. The next day, we see that Bertia isn't about to give up on her plans. She tries to get Cynthia and Balti to spend some quality time together, but our protagonist butts in as well, even though Balti says he was the one who invited him. That's when Bertia notices something interesting. Cynthia's wearing pants. When she asks why, Cynthia just laughs and shows her by example. Turns out she's really good at horseback riding, which is exactly what they came there to do. Balti is impressed by her skills, but Bertia doesn't get it at all. After all, wasn't Lady Cynthia supposed to be super weak after an illness? The detail Bertia forgot is that this illness only happened during a pandemic, and Cynthia herself says she's never had anything serious in her whole life. Our protagonist explains the situation to Bertia, and she feels really bad, unable to believe how much the story has changed in such a short time. Cecil elegantly takes Bertie on his horse, while the other two start going faster and faster. Without meaning to, the two of them end up competing. Neither wants to lose, and our protagonist doesn't want to be left behind either. Actually, that's just an excuse to make Bertie hold on to him a little tighter. To tease her, he even steers the horse into a ditch and makes a huge jump. Even though things got out of hand, Cynthia tells Balti that she lost the race but had a ton of fun. She asks if he can keep her company another day, and he immediately agrees since he doesn't want to slack off on his training. While the two of them are super happy, Bertie is shaken because she didn't expect the jump to be so scary. Cecil loves seeing her reactions, but thinks that this time he might have gone a little too far. The problem is that while they're talking, Miguel walks by with a young lady. That's normal for Cecil, since his friend loves going out with lots of girls, but Anne doesn't like it one bit. If looks could kill, things would get pretty tense for him. The next day, Miguel ends up bumping into Anne. He notices her anxious expression and asks if everything's okay, letting her know he's great at resolving conflicts if she wants to talk about it. Seeing her like this brings back childhood memories because he always tried to cheer her up, but this time it's something she needs to handle on her own. Her father sent a letter demanding that she quickly decide what to do about the engagement to Miguel's brother. That leaves Miguel instantly shocked. The news catches him completely off guard, and it's obvious he doesn't like it one bit. But suddenly, Bertia shows up and tells Miguel that he's the one who needs to make a decision there. Miguel is stunned, but Bertia stands her ground and throws it in his face that he's the one who needs to decide. It seems like she said too much in front of everyone, because Miguel goes to complain to Cecil, begging him to keep Bertia in check. Turns out his fiancée told Anne how he fell without asking his permission. This puts Miguel in a terrible situation. He can't be in love with his own brother's potential fiancée. That's why he tried to forget about Anne by going out with several other ladies, but no matter how hard he tries, he can't love anyone but her. He adores her and at the same time feels frustrated because even though his heart belongs to her, she can never be his. This also catches our protagonist off guard, but now the problem is even bigger. He didn't have time to warn that Anne was right behind, listening to everything. Bertia gets annoyed and tells Miguel that if he loves her so much, he should try harder to be with her. Miguel explains that if they got married, she would only be a countess and maybe wouldn't be as happy as she deserved. That's when he notices the audience. He's left speechless, and Bertia tells the truth. Financial stability is important, but women are happy where there is love. Besides, she's sure he's just mad about losing the girl to a womanizing brother. And Bertia assures him that Anne would 1,000 times rather be the wife of a count who truly loves her. Poor Anne is dying of embarrassment, but she admits it's true. Miguel can hardly believe what he just heard and asks if she's serious. The girl is so embarrassed she can't even speak. So Cecil tells Miguel and Bertia not to pressure her. He also explains to his friend that the title's important, but if Miguel becomes his assistant, he'll be the assistant to the future king, which brings a lot of status. Miguel doubts whether he can do something like that, but Bertia tells him he just needs to try really hard. Cecil agrees, saying it all depends on his determination. With those words, Miguel gathers his courage, kneels in front of Annie, and confesses that he has always been deeply in love with her. He promises to become a man worthy of courting her at any cost, asking only that she watch over him and support him. The girl replies that she is also a noble and understands how a political marriage works, but she would rather have a happy marriage, one where there's love. That's why she wants to think about her own future. Miguel thinks that's perfect and says that her answer alone is enough to make him want to serve even the Demon King himself. It's a cool line, but Cecil notices that they're calling him the Demon King. In the end, everything worked out, and Bertia is super happy. Switching couples, the next day there's a curious theme. Bertia finds Prince Chan looking really happy. He says he got a very rare sweet that is only sold in another region. But then Joanna comes over, all happy for him, which catches Chan by surprise. She tries to be nice, but Chan can't even look her in the eye. He suddenly runs off, making up an excuse that he has something to do. Bertia can't believe he treated his future fiancé like that. Joanna tries to play it off, telling Bertia not to worry, but deep down she wants to find a way to improve their relationship. It's clear that his attitude hurt Joanna. Coincidentally, Silica walks by nearby, insisting that Crom eat something. He apologizes, saying the heat killed his appetite. She gets really mad, warns him that he'll get even weaker, and tells him to eat the sweets she just made. Bertia overhears this and thinks it's a brilliant idea. In no time, she ropes everyone into her plan to make homemade sweets. Joanna gets excited to help, but Bertia is even more pumped, knowing this could win Chan's heart. This time, they got a top-notch teacher, Chef Silica. Silica says that a few days ago she gave Crom some vegetable cookies. Since he hates veggies, that was the way she found to get him to eat them and take care of his health. Bertia thinks that's wonderful, saying that's the true power of love. Silica gets super embarrassed and prefers to focus on the recipe. Since it's their first time in the kitchen, they decide to make simple cookies. During the process, they ask Joanna why Chan acts the way he does. According to Joanna, he's always been distant, but now she feels like he's even afraid of her. She thinks maybe she was a bit too intense, but keeps that to herself. Silica suggests that maybe Chan feels intimidated because Joanna seems too perfect, and he's afraid she'll get mad if he messes up. Silica herself feels something similar. The more she tries to be a perfect lady, the more she thinks Crom is afraid of her. Apparently, they're childhood friends. Silica was the only one who really talked to him. When they were kids, she noticed he was always by himself, so she took the initiative to get closer. Remembering that makes her so happy she goes silent. Bertia asks what happened, but she gets embarrassed and goes back to cooking. An hour later, the cookies are ready, but the result isn't great. Silica's cookies turned out beautiful, shaped like hearts. Bertia's weren't as pretty, but they looked tasty. Jonah's, on the other hand, were nowhere near a success. The friends try to stay optimistic, saying maybe the taste will make up for it, but when they try them, they realize it's gonna be tough. Jonah gets frustrated. She's always been able to do everything easily and doesn't understand why she failed at something as simple as making sweets. The friends try to comfort her, but there's not much they can do. Even so, they don't give up and really put in the effort to bake something tasty. Word of the whole situation reaches Cecil through Zeno, who tells him about the chaos with Jonah's sweets. He says they couldn't eat them by themselves, so Bertia gave him the cookies and told him everything that happened. Cecil agrees that she really doesn't have any talent for cooking. A little while later, Jonah works up the courage and gives the cookies to Chan. You can tell she put a lot of effort into it. Chan accepts and tries them, but he's honest and says they're pretty dry. When she hears that, Jonah apologizes for making him eat something like that, and he asks why she's acting so weird. That's when she reveals that she baked them herself. Since he likes sweets, she wanted to cheer him up, but no matter how hard she tried, she just couldn't get it right. She was already saying goodbye so she wouldn't bother him anymore, but Chan stops her right there. He's completely taken aback and surprised by the gesture. Almost at the same time, in the student council room, everyone is suffering from the heat, but the most downcast is Crom, who just got a letter full of complaints from his dad. Just then, Silica and Bertia come in, bringing some snacks for everyone. But as soon as she walks into the room, Silica immediately starts scolding Crom. She tells him not to leave his clothes lying around because they'll get wrinkled, and complains about the mess he makes. That's when things get ugly. Crom's patience runs out. He snaps and says he doesn't like being around Silica because she scares him. And he tells the truth, saying that if she hates him so much, it's better not to even come near him. He says he doesn't even understand what they are to each other since she's always scolding him, but they're just childhood friends. He thinks that's really annoying, and the mood in the room instantly drops. Our protagonist gets that Crom might have been in a bad mood, but knows he crossed the line. Silica starts crying right away, and Bertia gets furious with him. She demands that he finally realize the love and affection Silica has for him. Since he doesn't get it, Bertia starts throwing the facts in his face, asking who picks up the candy he drops, who lends him a handkerchief so he doesn't get the books dirty, and getting straight to the point, who would bake homemade cookies if they didn't feel anything? Silica is mortified and tries to say it's just part of her personality. Miguel can actually relate to the situation. Unable to take it anymore, Silica runs off and Bertia goes after her to talk in private. Silica's really upset with Bertia, complaining that she doesn't understand how delicate a girl's heart is. Bertia immediately apologizes, but Silica admits that this also helped her realize something. They're not kids anymore, and she's always on his case, so she decides to distance herself for a while. The next day, her absence is felt. First, Crom couldn't sleep well and realizes it's because Silica would always do something to help him relax. That day, she didn't even come near him, and he thought it was weird not being able to hear her. In the end, he ends up falling asleep on the couch, and someone covers him with a blanket. He immediately thinks it's Silica, but gets a shock when he realizes it's Miguel. That alone is enough to give someone trauma at the very least. Cecil's there too, and finds it a bit funny. He points out that it was normal for Crom to think that since Silica always took care of him. Crom agrees, admitting that he had never realized that before. Cecil replies that now that he knows, he should talk to her in person. Crom gathers his courage and goes to meet Silica. She gets startled and immediately starts apologizing for bothering him all this time, promising she won't come near him anymore. However, Crom interrupts her right then and there. He admits that he was the one who made the mistakes. The only thing he can do now is sincerely apologize from the heart. Thinking about what Bertia had said, he confesses that he's not very good with romantic matters, so he doesn't really know what to say, but he promises to try his best not to upset her again. Finally, he asks Silica to always stay by his side, something Silica happily agrees to. And to top it all off, in the background are the ever-present gossipers. Right then and there, she notices that Jonah and Sean are also getting along much better. Cecil says that he had a brief talk with his brother and confirmed that he really did feel inferior to Joanna since she was always perfect and so confident. But everything changed when he saw her so vulnerable because of the cookies. That's when Sean realized she was just a regular person, and on top of that, he felt the urge to protect her. Interestingly, Bertia has been doing an excellent job with all the couples she's helped, and she's so happy about it that she decides to celebrate, at least quietly to herself. But right at that moment, something happened that not even our protagonist noticed, the huge wave of malice that was growing around him. A little while later, we see two students reading a book that Bertia made for them. It was really beautiful and interesting, just what you'd expect from someone like her. But then, guess who shows up? Anderon. She comes in saying that actually Bertia forced her own maid to make the book, and she goes on to say she's there to reveal the truth, that Bertia is always tormenting the poor girl. The girls get confused and ask why she would do that. According to Enderon, it's because Bertia is insanely jealous of her sweetness and popularity. A little while later, Cecil ends up finding out about all this behavior. That's because Enderon started getting a lot more aggressive and bothering Bertia, spreading nasty rumors and making up false accusations about her. For Bertia, all of this seems totally normal. After all, that's how the villain and the heroine are supposed to face off. But for her friends, there's nothing funny about it. While he was thinking about that, Carlos shows up with the student council plans for middle school. Since Cecil started high school in the middle of spring, Carlos is the one running the middle school council now, but his friend didn't just come by to drop off paperwork. He had an important question. He wanted to know if Cecil would allow Bertia to call him little brother Carlitos. Very politely, Cecil replies that not even in his wildest dreams. At that moment, the rest of the council arrives and Carlos leaves to take care of his own work. But the council members show up wearing something new, earrings that Bertia gave him as gifts. And the thing is, she didn't give our protagonist anything. At that moment, Cecil starts giving off a scary aura. Miguel gets startled because he's never seen his friend like that before and asks if he's angry. This ends up being a clue for Cecil himself. Since he almost never loses his cool, he hadn't even noticed, but the truth is, he was really frustrated and bothered. Later, when he meets up with Bertia, he takes the opportunity to ask her about this whole Carlitos thing. All happy, she confirms that it's true to her. Unlike in the original game, she's not his adopted sister, so she just wanted to play the role of the little sister to get in the way of his relationship with the heroine. But of course, with Cecil it's a different story, because he wants him to stay as close as possible to Enderon. Besides that, she confides that she never had siblings in her past life and always wished she did. Cecil suggests that if she wants it so much, she can call him little brother too, but she immediately refuses. She actually loved the idea, but remembers that he's Prince Cecil and her fiancé, not her older brother. Hearing that gets Cecil really excited, and he tells her she needs to give him a nickname, since there's no way he'll let her call Carlos little brother. Bertia gets super nervous and doesn't know what to do. She musters up the courage and ends up calling him Cel. Our protagonist gets all giddy again and, taking advantage of the moment, casually asks if she doesn't have something to give him. Bertia tries to play dumb, pretending she doesn't know what he's talking about, but Cecil is straightforward and says that being left out of the gift makes him really sad. She gets startled and tries to explain, saying she thought he didn't need it. Cecil replies that he does need it, and there's nothing wrong with him wearing it. He goes over to her little box himself and notices that the earrings have the colors of his eyes and hair mixed together, and they're still connected by a red chain, looking like the red string of fate. He thinks it's adorable, but they're not just ordinary accessories. Bertia put protective dark magic on them to block Enderon's charm magic. And she gave these to the boys and to all her friends. That's the reason she didn't want to give the earring to Cecil. In her mind, he really wants to be with Enderon, so he wouldn't need to protect himself from the girl's power. Cecil tells it like it is. Without the protection, he'd basically become a puppet. And obviously, Bertia doesn't want that to happen. That's why Cecil insists this is yet another reason for him to wear the earring, so he doesn't lose his mind and can choose his own lady by his own will. He grabs the earring himself, puts it on, and even asks Zeno to add a bit of his magic to it. That makes Kuro show up right away, totally on high alert. The thing is, there's a catch to this magic. The earring can't be taken off anymore. Bertia gets super embarrassed because if people see the two of them wearing matching accessories, they'll think they're a totally lovey-dovey couple. If that happens, she's sure the heroine will get the wrong idea and pick a different route. But Cecil reassures her, reminding her that the girl's pretty stubborn. To top it off, he even calls her Auntie, a nickname for Bertia just to tease her, since he insisted she call him Sil. The poor thing turns redder than a tomato. But our protagonist is persistent and doesn't take no for an answer, so he leaves super happy after that conversation. He even realizes it's 1,000 times more fun to hear things straight from her than from anyone else. And while he was walking around, a girl comes up to him with a letter from His Majesty. They were direct orders from his father. He would have to travel to the neighboring kingdom to study for about 4 months. Already in the other kingdom, we see Cecil accompanied by the local duke. The guy brags that liquor is their region's specialty. And taking advantage of the topic, the Duke mentions that he heard Cecil's people were complaining about the rise in liquor prices. He pretends to be really upset about it, but says the old price wasn't the normal one. For Cecil, the move was obvious. They sold it cheap to take over the market, the product got popular, and then they raised the price. And of course, anyone who missed the taste would pay more without complaining. Our protagonist agrees that it's a great way to make money, but he gets straight to the point. He points out that his people have also been working hard for years producing alcohol and have created top quality products, so there's no need to worry about his kingdom. With all the politeness in the world, he says that on his next visit, he'll make a point of showing them the products, leaving the stuck-up old man looking pretty embarrassed. Anyway, Cecil is in this country because they started acting pretty suspicious. For sure, his father sent him there to keep everyone in line. That's why he's been gathering information in his own way and pushing some deals for his own benefit. But honestly, he finds all of this really boring. What he looks forward to most each day are Bertia's letters and the reports about her that he asked the staff for. In her last letter, Bertia says everything is great in the kingdom and hopes he's doing really well too. But she mentions that Inderon looked beautiful and that everyone is loving the heroine more and more. That's why Cecil immediately asks to read the messenger's report, and then things get ugly. Without Cecil's protection around, they took the chance to ruin Bertia's reputation. Inderon has been up to all sorts of nasty things and blaming Bertia for him. She tore up books, put dead bugs in people's tea, slipped rocks into their shoes, and the harassment was intense. Unfortunately, the Academy is of Inderon's fans, and they're going head-to-head with anyone who tries to defend Bertia. Cecil knows that Bertia's friends have already noticed what's going on, and he's bothered that she hasn't asked for help. He mentions to Zeno that this tactic is really strange and starts to notice a pattern. It's like Inderon is going out of her way to paint Bertia as the big villain. She doesn't attack Bertia directly because if she did, she'd end up being the villain herself. The girl is pretty shameless in her actions, but for now, Cecil can't jump to conclusions since he only has secondhand information. Anyway, a week later, he's finally welcomed by Bertia at her house. He gets straight to the point and asks if anything weird happened while he was away, but she lies and says no. Our protagonist doesn't beat around the bush. He immediately says he already knows about the problems at the academy. Urcha tries to pretend she doesn't care. After all, in her mind, she's the villain of the story, so it's actually a good thing this is happening. But Cecil ends this. He says that as her fiancé, it's his duty to protect her, and she shouldn't mind if he takes care of the situation. But Bertia stands her ground and asks him not to do anything. Her plan is to be a first-class villain. She won't depend on anyone and will dedicate herself to evil with pure nobility. She only asks that he comfort Inderon when the time comes to teach her a lesson, because that way the two of them would get closer. Feel the drama. Hearing this makes Cecil furious. He can't understand why she defends those who hurt her, and what hurts most is that she won't ask him for help. Then he asks her straight up, does she really want him to be friends with the girl who hurts his fiancé? Bertia blurts out that she's only the fiancé for now, but in the future it'll be Inderon. That was the last straw for Cecil, who tells her to stop with that talk once and for all. He's already said it 1,000 times. The only fiancé he has is her, and she's the only person he'll protect. Bertia tries to argue that he shouldn't put her on a pedestal. Besides, the last thing she wants is to see him going head-to-head with the heroine. That absolutely cannot happen in the story. Our protagonist warns that things are only going to get worse, but Bertia keeps insisting she doesn't need any help. With a smile on her face, she says she's a very strong woman. That's the last straw for what little patience Cecil had left. He says that if that's how it is, she can do whatever she wants. He gets up right away, apologizes, saying he's lost his appetite, and leaves. On the way out, even he doesn't understand why he got so worked up, but it was clear that his anger wasn't going away anytime soon. And so, almost a month passes since he returned to the kingdom. Bertia is still being harassed, but he's decided not to say another word about it. One fine day, you can hear an argument from far away. 3 students are confronting Inderon because she was the only one who didn't turn in a questionnaire about the cultural festival, and that was giving Bertia and other people a headache. Inderon plays dumb and says she never got any paper, but the girls remind her that they told her several times the deadline was last weekend. With a straight face, Inderon claims that Bertia must have hidden the paper just to mess with her. That really ticks off the girl who was confronting her. She can't believe Inderon had the nerve to blame Bertia when it was her own fault. Out of nowhere, Inderon starts crying, and the boys nearby rush over to comfort her, assuring her they're on her side. Cecil, watching everything, quickly notices from the guys' expressions that they'd fallen right under her charm spell. What nobody expected was for Bertia and her friends to show up right at that moment. They catch Inderon scheming again, but the girl turns the tables. Crying her eyes out, she points her finger and accuses Bertia of being the one to blame for everything, asking why she's so mean.
The friends, already out of patience, snap back saying it's Ain't Darren who's making Bertia suffer. But Bertia tells everyone to stop. She steps forward, head held high, and says she's not gonna run away or hide, so there's no need to drag anyone else into this. She loudly declares that Inderon is her target and that she'll handle the situation herself. Anderon cries even harder, calling Bertia cruel. But the plan backfires. The girls who are demanding the questionnaire are impressed. Even after suffering so much injustice, Bertia stood up to her directly and played fair. They really respect her for her integrity. Bertia thought she was nailing the villain role, but the girls realized she only stepped in to keep them from losing their cool. Inspired, they say they're gonna work hard to become ladies as good and strong as she is. The scene completely unmasks Einderon, who doesn't understand what's going on and storms off, furious that things didn't go according to plan. But from a distance, we see that there was another boy paying attention to Bertia and some women having tea nearby. One of these women gets really angry, makes up an excuse that the teacher called her and stomps off. Meanwhile, Cecil decides to follow Einderon and walks right into a disturbing scene. The girl was repeatedly stabbing the chair where Bertia used to sit. Really worried, and with good reason, Zeno asks if he's not gonna do something about it. After all, that chair had been custom made by Bertia's father, especially for his daughter. Cecil knows that putting an end to Eindron's party would be easy, but he remembers that Bertia made it clear she didn't want any help. Anderon starts to leave and they get ahead of her, but when she walks past Cecil, he can't hold back and warns her that if she doesn't ease up on these games, things are gonna end badly for her. Anderon leaves. Cecil's a bit shocked at himself because he didn't mean to threaten her. He just wanted to watch and let Bertia handle things on her own, but he realized that just sitting on the sidelines is way too boring. For now, he just asks Zeno to take care of the broken chair. Sometime later, Cecil was handling some matters when his younger brother, Shen, showed up begging him to do something about that woman. He says that both he and Joanna are really upset seeing how much Bertia is being bothered. Cecil explains that Bertia asked him not to get involved, so he's just watching. Shen is surprised because he thought Bertia was special to him. Our protagonist says yes, after all, she's his fiancée, but his brother makes it clear that's not what he meant. Shen noticed how Cecil acts around her and realized she's one of a kind in his life. Cecil admits that he doesn't like seeing his fiancée suffer either. Then Shen drops the million-dollar question just because she asks, is he really not going to do anything to help? Cecil insists that she turn down his help. Seeing his reaction, Shen picks up on what Cecil himself hadn't realized. Cecil was really upset because the person he loves most doesn't rely on him. When he hears this, our protagonist freezes, surprised, because he knows his brother is absolutely right. But before he could think anymore about it, Miguel comes running in, all worked up, bringing terrible news. Bertia fell down the stairs. When our protagonist rushes to see her, she's already resting in bed. Bertia thanks him for taking the time to come by, but Cecil just wants to know what happened. According to her, she needed to grab some things from the student council room, and since Fanil was with her, it was no problem. Interestingly, Fanil is the same guy who was watching Bertia earlier. He's the son of a count and is part of her fan club. Just hearing that, Cecil makes a mental note that he needs to look into this guy later. Back to the topic, Bertia says she was leaving the student council room and ended up bumping into a student who was running up the stairs right behind her. That's when the fall happened, but she tries to play it off, pretending it wasn't anything serious thanks to Kuro, who used protective magic at the time. Cecil accepts the explanation, but what he really wants to know is if she recognized who did it. Bertia says she has no idea because she was looking at the floor. He insists, so what was the person's hair color or what were they wearing? She hesitates, not wanting to give anything away, but the protagonist presses her. In the end, she admits that the girl had pinkish blonde hair and looked a lot like Anderon. Bertia even tries to take pride in the situation, saying that this is exactly how a heroine and a villain should face off. But it's obvious she's not okay because she can't stop shaking. Then things get serious and Cecil decides it's time to stop ignoring the problem. He holds her hand, still trying to make sense of the huge feeling inside him.
When Bertia got hurt, he felt for the first time the pain of seeing the person he loves most suffer. With his heart in his hands, he says he knows she wants to do things her own way, But now there's nothing wrong with him acting his own way too. The first thing our protagonist does is gather everyone who cares about Bertia and ask for their help with his little personal revenge. And the group, guess what, is really happy to see that the boss finally took action. The most excited of all is Joanna, because in her mind, anyone who dares to hurt the lovely Bertia needs to be out of the picture as soon as possible. Sean gets on board too and just wants Anderon to be arrested, but Cecil points out that this time she wasn't the one to blame. Everyone is left totally confused. Cecil explains that Anderon always limited herself to tarnishing Bertie's reputation, but the direct harassment got way worse, and the stairway accident was the last straw. In short, the real culprit is someone else. Joanna immediately wants to know who it is, and the answer comes right away: Aelin Silverts, the daughter of a viscount. Just by hearing the name, Cecil already makes a mental note to investigate this guy later. A week later, we see Anderon bothering Bertia again, but this time she's furious because there are rumors going around that she was the one who pushed Bertia down the stairs. Bertia has no idea what she's talking about. Anderon accuses Bertia of having planned everything and keeps calling the girl a villain non-stop. Our protagonist just watches the scene from a distance. Actually, this wasn't part of the plan, but it worked out perfectly. It's just that on that very day, they were planning to catch the real culprit who had been invited thanks to Fanil. Just like Cecil promised, he investigated the guy thoroughly and found out that Aelin has unrequited feelings for him. And when Fanil became a huge fan of Bertia, that's exactly when the harassment started. On one of those days, Aelin saw the guy she likes all happy next to Bertia. Blinded by rage, she ended up pushing the girl down the stairs. That seems to be the whole truth. Cecil doesn't know whether to feel sorry or find it funny, because it takes a lot of nerve to mess with his fiancée. While Anderon kept bothering Bertia, our protagonist shows up and tells her to stop with the pointless attacks. As soon as she sees the prince, Anderon changes instantly. She starts acting like a helpless little princess, saying that Bertia is trying to frame her and even throws out a bunch of light magic. Cecil stops a bit before getting close, but notices that the leather barrier is really strong and he doesn't even feel a thing from that attack. He tells Anderon that everyone was super careful and avoided talking about the accident, so Bertia didn't even know who they were blaming. Taking advantage of the moment, he calls everyone's attention nearby, assuring them that he's going to clear up all the confusion about that rumor right then and there. First, he confirms with Anderon that she had nothing to do with the fall. Bertia had said that the culprit had the same hair as her but never mentioned Anderon's name. And Bertia agrees right away. Our protagonist even finds it funny, because if he said it was Anderon, Bertia would finally become the villain she so desperately wants to be. But that's not going to happen. He just tells the crowd that someone took advantage of the rivalry between the two of them. Feel the tension. At that moment, Aelin turns as white as a sheet. She tells Fanil that she's not feeling well and tries to leave, but the guy won't let her, saying the party can't start without her. Cecil comes over, thanks Fanil for his help, and drops the bomb. He asks Aelin point blank if she was having fun committing crimes and blaming others. The girl tries to play dumb, throwing the blame back on Anderon. But then Joanna steps in, revealing that they've been keeping an eye on her for a week already. And during that surveillance, they noticed something really strange. Whenever Aelin went into the locker room, it was Anderon who came out. But when they checked the bathroom, there was no one else inside. And this happened several times. On top of that, every time this fake Anderon showed up, Birch's stuff ended up ruined. Aelin tries to make an excuse, saying they must have seen it wrong, but Cecil says they've got plenty of proof. Then Crom takes the stage. He was all set for action, but freezes up a bit with everyone watching. Luckily, his girlfriend gives him a little encouragement and he calms down. Crom shows two chemical solutions that change color when mixed together. He gets a little carried away and talks too much, but what really matters is the trap. The team spread that same compound in Bertia's locker, in the girls' dorm, which is where the culprit loved to strike. And there was no way to mess it up, because they cleaned everything up after the girl pulled her stunt. No beating around the bush, they ask Aelin for one of her shoes. Just to be sure, they ask for Anderon's shoe too, and he hands it over right away to prove his innocence. Joanna puts pressure on Aelin, who tries to stall and asks if she has any reason to hide her shoe. With no way out, she gives it up. Crom runs the test. On Anderon's shoe, the color stays the same, but when the liquid hits Aylin's shoe, it instantly turns blue. Cecil cuts to the chase and asks if she has anything else to say. Desperate, Aelin makes up a story that it's all just a scheme by the student council to protect Anderon and blame an innocent person. Cecil gives her a scary look, but says that for her own good, he's gonna pretend he didn't hear such nonsense. Coincidentally, that was the day for cleaning the dorms. If she had anything that could incriminate her, she couldn't leave it in a room. Right at that moment, she tries to hide a bag, but Carlos is quicker and snatches it from her hand. She freaks out and asks for it back, but he just opens it in front of everyone and pulls out a pinkish blonde wig. Andren is in shock. Cecil reminds Aelin that he had already warned her to tone down the pranks. Vanille comes close in and she tries to explain herself, but he cuts her off immediately, saying he despises her from the bottom of his heart. Aelin breaks down in tears. With the problem solved, Cecil takes his beloved's hand and leaves. But Anderon doesn't give up and goes after them, making a scene, saying she's the only victim and demanding comfort. Cecil looks at her with disgust, but keeps his composure and says that's not his responsibility, and that the priority now is to let Bertia rest. Before they can leave, Anderon completely loses it and tells Bertia it's all her fault, questioning why she brought the other couples from the story together. Furious, she tells Bertia to hurry up and act like a villain already and make everyone hate her. Bertia admits that that's exactly what she's been trying to do. Einderon yells that Prince Cecil will only be happy with her, the true heroine, and that Bertia will never take the place of the destined maiden. Poor Bertia is left speechless. Cecil is confused by the crazy logic that he absolutely has to end up with the heroine. Anderon says the world exists for her to shine and insists that the prince will be hers one day, storming off in a huff. Bertia tries to apologize but blacks out and faints right there. Everyone rushes to help and the prince insists on carrying her so she can rest. Looking at her, Cecil thinks he should have been more careful. One of the maids had already warned that Bertia was pretending to be okay, but she could barely sleep since the fall. This only makes Cecil realize how much he doesn't want to lose her. She's one of the few people who bring joy to his life, and he can't let her wear herself out like this. When she wakes up and looks at Cecil, she tells him that it's all over. Bertia thinks she's in a beautiful dream being pampered by him, but he breaks the ice by saying that everyone outside is really worried. She straightens up immediately when she realizes it's real and tells everyone to come in. The group comes in, making a huge commotion, leaving Bertia confused. Cecil steps forward and assures her that everyone is on her side and that she doesn't have to suffer alone, which the group enthusiastically confirms. This makes Bertia so happy that she promises to try even harder. Seeing her all excited again, Cecil realizes that she always attracts good people around her. And it's exactly because of that brilliant and unpredictable mind that he can't stop watching her. Time passes, and about 2 months later, we see Bertia with Sean, who is now the student council president, announcing the start of the cultural festival. Cecil explains that this event didn't even exist in the original story. It was Bertia's idea, so people could create good memories. He says that since she invited him, he's gonna enjoy it. Actually, he has fun just seeing how happy she is. At that moment, Joanna shows up to join Sean and takes the opportunity to update Cecil about Eileen. The stairway incident was treated as an attempted murder, and she's in jail, awaiting trial for other crimes. A little later, Cecil meets up with Bertia and greets her with a kiss on the hand, saying he missed her a lot. She gets all flustered, but relaxes when he pulls some sweets out of his pocket. She starts eating, super happy, and Cecil takes the opportunity to wipe the corner of her mouth. This really surprises Bertia, because he never does that kind of thing in public. And the big detail? There was a whole crowd watching the scene with their jaws dropped. The next day, the closing party takes place. As the organizer, it's Bertia who gets to announce the winning couples. Everyone's expectations are through the roof. She announces a tie for third place, with Crom and Silica sharing the podium with Cynthia and Bout. In second place, Joanna and Char. And full of energy, she goes to announce first place, but is shocked to see that the winners are Cecil and Bertia. When it sinks in, she panics and can't even speak. Silica steps up and reads the comments from the votes. Everyone thought it was incredibly romantic to see the prince wiping Birch's mouth the day before. Cecil walks up on stage looking all impressive, but Bertie is so embarrassed she almost faints again. He catches her before she hits the floor, thanks everyone for their votes, and says that their relationship will be built on a lot of respect and mutual love.
Then he gently picks her up princess style and kisses her on the cheek, leaving her on cloud 9. He truly couldn't be any happier than he is now. When night falls, the two of them slip away from the crowd. Bertia is upset, saying he shouldn't have done that. In a perfect script, Enderon is supposed to defeat her and get the happy ending. She just wanted to make good memories, but now she says she'll be embarrassed to remember all this when he marries the heroine. Cecil apologizes, but as if she wasn't happy with the prize. She admits that she was really pleased. Cecil confesses that he loves teasing her, but he also did it to show everyone how close they are and to finally put an end to the worries she'd been having. And in his own mind, he vows a solemn and silent promise to himself. He'll never, ever allow these happy memories to eventually transform into something painful for her. Time goes by and suddenly we're already in Cecil's 3rd year. He's just about to finish high school while Bertia has just started her 1st year. Bertia keeps avoiding our protagonist. Actually, instead of just avoiding him, you could say she's literally running away every time she sees the guy. And it's pretty likely that all of this is because of what Enderon told her that time. To be honest, Cecil knows that if he asks her directly, she won't explain the reason either. That's why he was avoiding bringing up the subject. But look, the situation has reached a point where he only has one option. If she runs away, he just needs to go after her and catch the girl. So the next day, he tried to talk to her, but once again, she ran off like a crazy person. Cecil went after her totally calm, asking why she was running so much, but he was only doing that to lead the girl straight into a trap. Finally, Cecil corners her. The poor thing asks if there's any way he could just let her go, but Cecil replies that males tend to want to catch prey that runs away. She immediately tells his animal that, for starters, she's not anyone's prey. But to Cecil, she looks delicious, so she doesn't really have much of a choice. Bertia, pretty scared, replies that maybe she does have a little extra meat on her bones, but she's sure she doesn't taste good, so she doesn't want to be devoured. And just because of that comment, our protagonist looks at her in a way that's anything but subtle. He also explains to her that carnivorous animals, in reality, don't usually chase just to eat, but also to have fun with their prey. Feel the drama. It's really cruel, but that's just how the animal kingdom works. On top of that, he lays it out for her, saying she's as beautiful as a doll, so he just can't resist the urge to play with her. Bertia's pretty happy, but she tries to play it cool and says he won't get anything out of her with all that flattery. Anyway, Cecil even thought about asking the girl who started all this mess why she acted that way. But that would definitely just make things worse, so it was better to let it go. And while he's thinking about all this, Bertia finally starts to speak. Or rather, she says she needs to start distancing herself from him. After all, there's about a year left until she's defeated and they finally say goodbye. To make things worse, the game has finally started forcing things to happen. In other words, it's trying to make the original story come true. Bertia, super serious, says there's a truth and she's only gonna tell him because he's someone she trusts. And the big secret is that she gained weight. He even tries to believe he misheard, but she repeats it. She just gained weight, and it's something that hasn't stopped since the end of the festival. Because of that, she realized it was the game's power-up to its tricks. At that moment, our protagonist would love to say a bunch of things, but first he just asks what her gaining weight has to do with the game's power. And according to her, it's because the original character is actually pretty chubby. She worked hard to keep her own appearance, but the game keeps insisting on making her bigger. Hearing this, Cecil tries his best to hold back his laughter because she's taking the situation really seriously. He then tells her that, actually, this weight gain has to do with what she's carrying in her pocket. It's just that ever since the festival, people have been giving her a ton of sweets as gifts. Thinking about it, the girl realizes it's true and gets even more freaked out, thinking the game's power had already been active before, but Cecil says no. During the event, everyone found out how amazing she is, so a lot more people started giving her sweets just to try to get closer to her. Even so, Bertia still thinks it's the work of the game. Cecil ends up losing his patience and says the solution is simple. Just eat less candy and the problem goes away. Since she doesn't want to waste anything, Cecil suggests sharing with the maids. But she wants all the sweets just for herself because she's a top-tier villain. That's when things get interesting. Cecil reminds her that to become a great villain, she has to stay by his side. But that doesn't make any sense to Bertia, because what she really wants is for Enderon to get rid of him so she can be rejected and follow the game's storyline. But our protagonist insists. He says that if she wants to be an excellent villain, she has to be super committed to having him all to herself, because that's the only way she could get in Darren's way. This makes Bertia really sad, because she doesn't want to get even more attached to him. If that happens, she won't be able to handle it when, in the end, he turns cold and the two of them say goodbye forever. And that's the real reason she's been avoiding the boy. Knowing this, Cecil even thinks it might be better to let her go right now. But he makes it clear that not even at the end of the game will he be cold to her, and asks her not to worry about those details and to leave everything in his hands. With that, she replies that she'll try her best not to run away from these feelings for a little while longer. She decides to hang in there because she wants to become a top-tier villain. But in his own mind, our protagonist has other plans. He has absolutely no intention of giving up this colorful life she brought to him. That's why he's gonna ask Carlos about Indoroa. He heard that the guy has been making some visits lately, and Carlos confirms it, saying that he's unbearable. Besides that, Carlos says that Indoron asked a bunch of questions about Miss Bertie and her family. Cecil immediately figures out that those questions were to find out if her family was committing any crimes or something like that. Carlos is even a little freaked out by how smart the kid is, because that's exactly what Darren kept asking about. And that's how our protagonist confirms that the fall of the Marquis, Silja's father, and her defeat are totally connected. Miguel and the rest of the group overhear the conversation and realize things are starting to get interesting. He takes the opportunity to mention that Indoron has also been giving him a major headache. So if they need a hand, he's totally in. And that reminds him of one detail. Indoron has been telling Agnid that Miguel is a womanizer. Feel the drama. That really gets to him because he only has eyes for his lady. And with Cran, it's the same story. Indoron tried to badmouth Silica, so he's not about to forgive her at all. Belle joins in too, and of course, Shao isn't left out because everyone's patience with Indoran has run out. Then Miguel asks what the evil plan is this time. Cecil answers that it's nothing major. He's just setting up some defenses to protect his fiancée. After all, it's not very gentlemanly to gang up on a defenseless girl. But the big irony is that this defenseless girl went and got herself right in the middle of the traps that were protecting his fiancée. So all it is just pure self-defense. That's why he's already got everything worked out with Carlos. When Indoron tries to ask something bad about Bertia's family, Carlos just needs to play along without confirming or denying anything, since neither the Marquis nor Bertia did anything wrong, so there's no stress. From what Bertia said, the big defeat is supposed to happen at graduation, so Indoron is definitely planning something for then, and Cecil is already really looking forward to seeing what will happen. When night falls, he takes the opportunity and goes straight to talk to his father. He figures that Bertia wants him to stay with Indoron for some reason that directly affects her, and if that's really the case, he's sure the reason is connected to the royal family. That's why he decides to have a direct conversation with the king, because he's sure the king knows something. For Cecil's father, it's really strange to see his son suddenly starting a conversation out of nowhere. Cecil quickly apologizes for interrupting during such a busy time and gets straight to the point. He asks if his father has ever heard any stories about a predestined girl. The king is pretty surprised because he thinks the topic is way too romantic. Cecil explains that he was doing some research and came across that term. Since it seems to be connected to royalty, his father should know something about it. The king stays silent for a moment and admits he'd love to understand why his son is so interested in this, but he already figures Cecil won't spill the beans. Even so, Cecil says that actually someone told him about a kind of prophecy where this girl was supposed to change his fate somehow. The king stops to think, but nothing comes to mind. There are thousands of legends about saints and warriors connected to royalty, but none of them match this story. Cecil asks if he's really serious, and his father confirms that he is. With that, our hero realizes he's not lying and comes to the conclusion that this prophecy is nothing but a made-up story. Even so, the king comments that, in any case, he should at least be curious since the story is about his destined girl. That's when things turn, as Cecil reveals he has a fiancée named Bertia. This shocks his father again. Seeing his reaction, Cecil asks why be surprised since the king arranged it. The father agrees, but avoids the subject. He just wants to know if his son is having fun right now. Cecil says yes. His fiancée keeps things lighthearted. That puts the father at ease, confirming his good judgment. Inside, Cecil feels uneasy but hides it well. He acts as usual and compliments his father, calling it expected of the king. As he walks through the hallways, Cecil reflects that his father's words brought him unexpected relief. He hadn't even realized it, but he'd been holding on to a completely new feeling inside. Worry, and that bothers him a little. After all, the plan he put together was supposed to be perfect. But even so, insecurity still crept in. On the other hand, he has to admit that feeling this way isn't so bad after all. And since time doesn't stop, we jump ahead to 3 months before graduation. There's a pretty interesting rule for this event. Cecil needs to attend with his fiancée, so he wants to give her a dress as a gift. But Bertia keeps insisting that he needs to go with Enderun instead. This starts to wear on Cecil's patience in a way you can't even imagine. He lays it out straight and says he's asking her, his partner, and he only wants her answer. Right after, he realizes he might have gone a little overboard with his tone, so he makes a caring gesture and invites her to take a walk and get some fresh air. Now that things have calmed down, they start talking about the color of the dress. At first, Bertia says she wants a yellow one, but then she changes her mind. She suggests blue, but since she has this whole idea of being a villain, she thinks red or black would be better. This really frustrates Cecil because he knows deep down she actually wants the yellow dress. He can't take it and asks why she's so indecisive. Bertia explains that she loves the color yellow, but she also really likes blue, and that's exactly why she doesn't want those colors for her dress. They bring back amazing memories, and she doesn't want to risk tainting those memories with sadness. Knowing this, Cecil says it would be best for her to just forget about this whole Enderun thing, but Bertia stands her ground and says she can't do that because she cares too much about everyone. According to her, in this whole story, the only ones who are really gonna get hurt are her father because of his past crimes and herself. The big issue is that her father didn't do anything wrong. At that moment, Bertia also asks for a diary to be brought in. That's because it has all the bad things she's done over the years written down in it. She wants to keep it as evidence, just in case, but we already know how this story goes. Bertia swears she did terrible things, but the reality is quite different. For example, there was a tea class where Enderun was being super unpleasant. No one wanted to pair up with her. Bertia volunteered and started teaching good manners in the most polite way. This made Enderun upset because she thought she was being criticized. She said Bertia was only doing that out of spite. But in her diary, Bertia writes thinking she made the girls suffer terribly. And no matter how much Cecil keeps reading the pages, he only finds more harmless crimes like this. In a normal situation, our protagonist would be laughing a lot at all of this. But the thing is, Bertia truly believes that this diary is her ace up her sleeve to be defeated. And even though Cecil tries to stay calm mentally, his body starts to react. Already out of patience, he asks Bertia if she hates being around him. She keeps repeating that if he ends up with Enderun, he'll be happy. He asks if she really believes that, because he refuses to accept that story no matter what. The only thing he can feel from all this is that she wants to distance herself. Obviously, Bertia gets really hurt and says that's not it at all. Cecil fires back, asking why she keeps running away then. She tries to explain, saying she's not running away from anything. It's exactly because she cares too much about him that she does these things. But Cecil, already exhausted, asks what her happiness actually means after all. With all the conviction in the world, she answers that it's being with Enderun forever. And deep down, Cecil is just thinking that for the first time in his life, he's hating someone with all his might. And that someone is Enderun. He hates this girl so much it actually hurts. Staying focused, he asks why Bertia insists on believing in such nonsense. With tears in her eyes, Bertia insists that it's all because of the fate that's coming. Cecil says that in that case, they just need to destroy this so-called fate. She warns him not to even think about it, because he'll regret it big time. But our hero is stubborn and says he's never regretted anything in his life. If she wants so badly to stop his plans, then she's gonna have to explain why. Without a good reason, there's no way he can make a decision. Looking closely at her, he realizes that deep down, she just can't bring herself to speak. For some reason, Bertia's always hurt his feelings, since she refuses to truly trust him. To him, this whole thing has already become ridiculous. He's gone over this story in his head 1,000 times in a cold, logical way, but these confusing feelings just get in the way of his thinking. Now, he just wants to put an end to this conversation. He stands up and says he'll choose the color of her dress himself. Bertia tries to stop him, but he drops a hard truth. He reminds her that she started playing this game from the very first day they met, when she announced she was a villain. The truth is, in the end, no matter how this story turns out, she just wants to sit back and watch it all unfold until the end. And even so, Bertia, deeply hurt, begs him to be happy. Our protagonist replies that yes, he will be happy, so she better stop running away. And with that, the day of the graduation party finally arrives. After much hesitation, Bertia ended up wearing the outfit he picked out. Like a true gentleman, Cecil compliments her and says she looks wonderful. She tries to start a conversation again, but he just asks for silence and tells her they'll have to go in soon. Even though she feels alone there, he asks her to wait for him. In his mind, the thought keeps repeating. He doesn't want to hear her say she wants to distance herself. Tonight, he's going to destroy every bit of that future that causes her so much pain. Right after that, the two of them are announced to enter. Right at the last second, Bertia gathers all the strength she has and asks him what he really feels for her. Without thinking twice, Cecil answers that he always thought she was really beautiful, even too beautiful. He was ready to keep talking, but they end up being called to go in. Even so, she interrupts him again, just to thank him for everything he's done for her up until that moment. Cecil is caught by surprise. As he walks, he makes it clear that this isn't going to end here. They're going to keep moving forward together, from now on and forever. Before the party really gets started, our protagonist does a quick recap in his head. He thinks specifically about Bertia's mission. His fiancée calls herself a villain, and according to her logic, her defeat will happen when she's left speechless in the middle of graduation. And all of this is because of that game Bertia played her. She truly believes that if Cecil ends up with Darren, happiness is guaranteed. But let's be honest, that only happened in the game. In real life, Cecil has already managed to shut down every crazy plan Bertia tried to put into action. And since he also had to keep the girl from distancing herself, his life at the academy was pretty complicated, but the big day finally arrived. Bertia is convinced that today all her crimes will be exposed in front of the whole school. That way, she would be defeated and he would end up with Darren. But before all this chaos starts, the king needs to give the opening speech. And that's exactly what happens. The king stands up and starts congratulating all the students. But guess who's up next to speak? Cecil himself, our hero, steps forward. First, he thanks everyone for being there. He thanks the teachers, the families, the students, and everyone in the hall. Not long after, the crowd's excitement was through the roof because of the speech, even shouting the name of the kingdom. The parents, of course, were super proud of their son. But his mother mentions that she wishes he would be a little more open. After all, both she and the king suspect that their son has a big plan in mind. It's not that they don't trust their son, but they're also really worried about poor Bertia. And look at that, Birch's father was right behind them and asked the queen to keep telling the king that. The Marquis was nothing but worried because his daughter, believe it or not, is a super sensitive girl, even though he agreed to all of this from the start. At least that's what the king says while sneaking a peek at Darren, who's there in the middle of the crowd. He's really curious since she's the main target of the night. Right at that moment, Darren is over there complaining that nobody came to get her, and because of that, she had to show up looking like some random background character. Changing the subject real quick, Cecil is now the student council president and needs to pass the baton to someone else. And the one chosen is none other than Miguel. The boy steps forward, and our hero starts handing over the responsibility to him. Miguel couldn't be more honored by the situation. Then come the applause and all the usual ceremony. Miguel thanks everyone for their trust and promises to take great care of the council, but the main detail happens when they give each other that fake hug. That's when Cecil quietly asks if the preparations are ready, and Miguel assures him that everything's in place. As soon as Miguel leaves the stage, Cecil takes the opportunity to announce that he has one more announcement to make. No one saw this coming. Bertia turns pale, scared to death. Meanwhile, Darren flashes that radiant smile, thinking her plan is going to work out perfectly, which Cecil actually finds pretty funny. That's when he asks Miss Evil Notes to come forward. While everyone is totally shocked by this out-of-the-blue request, Bertia mentally prepares herself, takes a step forward, and almost falls flat on her face. Cecil has to hold back his laughter, because poor Bertia was super focused on striking the perfect pose. But when she finally makes it to the front, she goes back to acting with complete elegance. She's ready to accept whatever Cecil does, because she trained hard for her role as the villain. Or at least that's what Cecil thinks she's thinking. But right at that moment, Cecil himself starts to get a little nervous. You can feel the tension. It's really weird for him, but it makes total sense. After all, this is one of the most critical moments of their lives. Cecil takes a deep breath and starts his speech, loudly declaring that Bertia has committed very serious crimes. The girl gets so nervous that she keeps accidentally interrupting him the whole time. She tries to shout that she didn't do anything wrong, but our protagonist puts his finger to her lips and says, "Shh, sweetheart, you don't know it, but you've committed a huge crime." And what was the crime? Being born 2 years after him. Because of that, he's gonna have to wait 2 years until she graduates and live apart from her until then, which he thinks is just absurd. But to make up for this injustice, he kneels down in front of everyone and says that as soon as she graduates, she'll have to become his wife, giving her a gorgeous promise ring. Bertie has no idea what's going on anymore. The poor girl's mind just goes completely blank and she can't get a word out. And wouldn't you know it, Cecil was a genius. Bertia had actually asked him to defeat her and leave her speechless. So, technically, our boy held up his end of the deal. That's where it ends for now. He announces to all the students that in 2 years they're going to be husband and wife, all to help the kingdom grow even more. Everyone starts clapping enthusiastically, but then Enderon steps in and tries to interrupt everything. You know how it is, right?
Cecil was already expecting this, so her presence isn't a problem at all. He asks Enderon what the reason for the opposition is. Without thinking twice, the girl shouts in front of everyone that Bertia is deceiving him. She says that Bertia discriminates against people based on class and is always tormenting the students, starting with herself. And then she drops the bomb that the day before, Bertia tried to push her down the stairs. Everyone in the hall is shocked. Cecil, as calm as ever, asks, "Really? Yesterday?" And Darren immediately confirms it, but then Cecil lays the truth out on the table. He explains that since Bertia is the crown prince's fiancé, there are people watching her all the time, so she could never do anything in secret. Worse yet, he reveals that yesterday Bertia was with them all afternoon. And after dinner, since she wasn't feeling well, he walked her to her room. He even asked the housekeeper to check on her from time to time, and according to the reports, Bertia didn't set foot outside her room at any point. With no way out, Enderon tries to make up a story that Bertia must have sent someone to push her. Cecil counters by saying that if that's the case, then someone else is to blame, and precisely for his fiance's sake, he's going to investigate the matter to clear her name. He even asks Enderon if she has any clue who might have done it. She replies that she still doesn't know. That really gets on Cecil's nerves, and he asks why she's accusing Bertia without any proof. Taking the opportunity, he asks Enderon to prove all this bullying she's been talking about. Enderon starts to panic and says there are plenty of other victims. She even asks the crowd to step forward, but guess what? There's this awkward silence and nobody moves. Enderon gets flustered, saying it's weird because they're always complaining about what Bertia did. But what she didn't realize is that those people are nobles. Even if Bertia had done something, no one would say a word because she's the crown prince's fiancé and that could ruin their own positions. But the truth is, Bertia never did anything bad to anyone. Cecil even notices a few girls in the audience who like to gossip, but that was all there was to it. Enderon keeps begging for someone to speak up, but nobody makes a sound. That's when Cecil declares that it's pretty clear everything she's saying is a lie, but anyone who thinks Enderon's gonna give up that easily is mistaken. She says that what she has to say she was actually gonna tell in private, but since she has no other choice, she pulls a folder out from under her skirt looking just like Doraemon. Everyone gives her a weird look because, let's be honest, that was a pretty clueless move. Enderon offers the folder to Cecil, but he doesn't even want to go near that thing. Luckily, Zeno gets the hint and does her the favor. He just hands the papers to Cecil, and as soon as Cecil glances at him, he's super impressed. But from Cecil's point of view, this was already expected, cause that's the investigation report about Bertia's father, who in theory was supposed to be a bad guy. In other words, Enderon had been investigating everything a secret, but our protagonist had already figured that out. What's most interesting is that Bertia had always been waiting for this moment, but it's clear that it hurts a lot to lose someone she loves. You can see she's really struggling with the situation, but deep down, that makes Cecil a little happy. Just a little bit though. And that's because she ends up clinging to him, which proves that this isn't really the future she wanted. With that, Enderon goes on and says that, as he can see, Marquise Noches has committed a bunch of crimes, and it's impossible for the daughter of a criminal to become the future queen. And what does Cecil do? He compliments her, saying it's a very well done report. He congratulates the girl for the solid evidence of wrongdoing. But there's one detail. He makes it clear that this isn't about Bertia's father. Actually, the evidence is against a Viscount named Consabite and a Baron named Sajo. And by coincidence, both of them are right there in the hall and end up being handcuffed on the spot. And Darren is so happy she can barely contain herself, thinking her plan worked. After all, she handed over proof of these crimes and their connection to Birch's family. But Cecil gives a very serious warning. He says that accusing the Marquis just because he has connections with these guys is pushing it, and it's a very serious accusation. This leaves Enderon desperate, and she tries to pin the blame on Miguel, saying he knows everything since he suffered a lot because of the Marquis. But Miguel tells it like it is and says he has no idea what she's talking about. This leaves Enderon confused again, because in her mind, he was always complaining to her, which is also just a lie. As Cecil himself had arranged with Miguel, he would just listen to what she said and then ignore everything. He never confirmed anything she said. And her attitude is a huge sign of disrespect, because Miguel has full permission to help the Marquis with his work, since they have a very trusting relationship. But Enderon is still stuck in her own world and insists that's a lie, claiming that Miguel suffered a lot. Talk about drama. This makes Cecil realize that Enderon is just like Bertia. She's convinced that the future is always tied to the story of that darn game. That's why, for her, just the fact that Miguel listened to the complaints was already proof that everything was happening exactly like in the game. And that's why Cecil tells Enderon that both he and the king already knew everything about that report. In other words, they already knew about the things she thought Bert's father had done because they were the ones who asked the Marquis to act as a spy in the first place. And Cecil makes a point of saying this really slowly, just to make her suffer a little more. Enderon is in shock, goes pale, and doesn't even know what to think. Cecil points out that it's already clear everything she thought and said was just a big misunderstanding. But the big question now is what they're gonna do with her. After all, what she just did was insult and harm his fiancé and her father in front of everyone. He says that both families will have to come to an agreement, and for now, it would be best if she tried to calm down. Some guards try to take the girl away, but she gets furious since in her mind, none of this makes any sense. Very frustrated and with tears in her eyes, she yells at Cecil that he should understand she's the heroine of the story. She asks why he doesn't choose her since she's the destined girl and insists that Bertia will never be able to take her place because she's just a simple villain. Calling Cecil a heartless prince, she insists that she's the only one who can make him truly human. This makes Bertia go pale and super worried. Up until now, she hasn't said a word, just watched all this chaos unfold. Enderon keeps complaining, saying that from the very beginning, she did everything the prince wanted. She showed up right in front of him, just like it happens in the game, and then went through all the other events. She didn't fail any of them, so she doesn't understand why she's not the one being chosen. In fact, today she even wore the yellow dress he likes so much, just because she wants to choose him. And even so, Cecil is treating her in a humiliating way. The guards are already losing their patience with Enderon because she's talking to the prince like that. Cecil, as calm as ever, replies that she's saying some really strange things. He says that at no point in his life did he ever say or even think that she would choose him in the end. And that completely sets Enderon off. She calls the prince a robot prince, saying that if he doesn't choose her, he'll just keep being a puppet without feelings, no matter how smart he is, all because she's supposed to be the destined girl. And Enderon isn't just annoying Cecil, but also his parents, since she's talking really badly about the prince. Even Bertia's dad and everyone else are looking at her like, what's gotten into this girl? According to her logic, if the prince kisses her right now, he'll realize she's the heroine because a magical mark will appear. Cecil looks at her, but he can't really understand what she's trying to say. He just notices that deep down there's a strange feeling stirring inside him. Bertia, in the cutest way possible, tries to cover his ears because she doesn't want him to hear those cruel words. Cecil immediately realizes that she knows it's hurting him, and she's trying to protect him in her own way. Thanks to that, the heavy mood passes, and Cecil just tells the guards to take that clueless girl away from here. Enderon storms off furious, of course, saying that she's a special and irreplaceable person. And while they're taking her away, something really bizarre happens. A bird crashes full force into the glass dome above him, breaks through the structure, and the whole glass shatters. Cecil's guardian spirits immediately spring into action to protect everyone. They get rid of the shards of glass as quickly as they can, but that's when they realize the danger. That thing is the spirit of light, in other words, Enderon's spirit, and it's coming straight at them. Kuro acts fast, puts up a barrier to protect the group, but that little bird just won't give up. Enderon isn't controlling the creature and has no idea what's going on, but the bird manages to draw something out and attacks even more fiercely. Kuro does what he can to defend himself, until the spirit simply vanishes. Zeno warns Kuro not to get distracted because the barrier's down, but right at that moment, the bird takes advantage of the opening and lunges at Cecil. At that moment, our protagonist starts to fall and realizes the situation is way more serious than he thought. Bertia, desperate, lets out a heart-wrenching scream. Meanwhile, Cecil ends up waking up in a very strange place. He remembers being attacked by the spirit of light, and it seems like he ended up in some unconscious dimension. His body's intact, but he's not even sure if that's his real body. And it's exactly at this moment that a memory suddenly appears out of nowhere. He opens his eyes and he's next to his father, who's joking around because he seems nervous about meeting his fiancée. In his mind, this is the first time he's going to see Bertia. He apologizes to his father for being distracted, and right after that, Bertia and her father walk into the room. They welcome him, and there she is, super cute, really nervous, introducing herself the best she can. Our hero just keeps staring at her intently until the two of them get a chance to talk alone.
From the very beginning, he acts like a true gentleman, takes her hand so they can walk together for a bit, and all Cecil does is watch Bertia's reactions. To him, she didn't act the same way as before. But right after, he realizes he's thinking about the past, which is really strange, since in theory, that was supposed to be the first time he ever saw her. They keep talking, trying to get to know each other, and Cecil doesn't stop analyzing the girl, because in this memory, she's just a normal, ordinary woman. He even offers her some sweets because he heard she loved him. But Bertia says she's not hungry, seeming a bit overwhelmed by the situation. Later on, she ends up leaving. When he's alone with Zeno, the butler asks what he thought of her. But Cecil doesn't have any opinion at all. He says his father decided everything and he's just gonna obey. As long as she doesn't give him a headache when she becomes queen, it's all good. In the end, it doesn't matter which girl he marries. It's not going to affect his life at all. Suddenly, Cecil snaps back to himself, but he's still stuck in this bizarre dimension. He's really confused because he knows he didn't actually live through that, but technically he just did. What really catches his attention is that Bertia is completely different in this memory. The real Bertia introduced herself right away, saying she was a villain. But if there was anything that truly bothered him about everything he just saw, it was the version of himself as a child. He knows it was him, of course, but there was just something that didn't add up. At that moment, he takes off a glove because he feels discomfort in his hand, and when he looks, he realizes it's not a normal hand. The first thing that comes to Cecil's mind are Enderon's words, that despite all his intelligence, he was nothing more than a puppet. He feels the weight of that. Those words really hurt. Ever since he was very young, he was always aware of how things were, and he knew that back then he was exactly like that, a living puppet with no emotion at all. And that's exactly why he had a single wish. He wanted someone to show up who would catch his attention, someone to protect, someone who would make him capable of feeling something. That's why, even though he experienced that memory in a strange way, he knows very well that Bertia isn't the girl he knows. He immediately understands that this memory is just an illusion the Enderon spirit tried to show him, and he knows it's not real. Even so, the feeling from that empty time seems to be stealing away all the warmth of the feelings he managed to build up thanks to Bertia. That's something that truly terrifies our protagonist. It makes him feel awful, because the last thing he wants in life is to go back to how he was before. But we keep following these memories, which basically show what was supposed to happen in the original story of the game. In this scene, we see Cecil talking, mentioning that a lot of people ended up losing their lives because of an epidemic. Cecil says there was no other choice. They knew that the Luona leaf could be used as medicine, but there was no way to grow that herb at the time. So there was nothing they could do at that moment. It's right then that he walks down a hallway and runs into Bertha's father, begging the king, pleading for God's sake, for some of that medicine to save his wife. The king tries to explain the situation, something he had already mentioned in the letter, a letter Cecil didn't even bother to read. But the only thing Cecil's worried about right then is seeing a man who had contact with a sick person getting so close to the king. To him, that's almost like trying to wipe out the entire kingdom. The king promises he'll try to help somehow, after whatever happens, because in the end, that's the only option they have left. With that, the Marquis simply leaves, and young Cecil watches the whole scene like it's the most normal thing in the world. The boy even goes up to his father, who was obviously much more sensitive, and tries to comfort him in his own logical way. He explains that what the king did was exactly right, because you can't give someone special treatment just because they're an assistant. The king agrees, saying that as a monarch, he's sure he made the right decision. But there's one thing, he knows very well that he just failed badly as a friend, and that leaves young Cecil pretty confused. When the Marquis's wife finally leaves, you can see the guy is completely devastated and empty inside. Bertha was there too, but she really didn't know how to react to any of it. To make things worse, young Cecil comes in, acting really strange. He offers his condolences, says he'll help with whatever they need, and then just leaves. It was right then that something clicked in the Marquis's mind. He stopped to think that he dedicated his whole life to serving the crown, and this was how he was repaid. The guy started to develop a deep hatred for all the nobility, and because of that, he got closer to Bertha. Really frustrated with everything, he told his daughter that she would have to become queen no matter what, because that was the only way she'd have priority and protection no matter what happened. And if it was about protecting his daughter, he was willing to do anything. That's when he chose to go down a dangerous path. When that part of the memory ends, Cecil realizes his own legs are given out, and when he looks down, he sees they've also turned into puppet legs. In theory, everything he just saw was the story he himself changed together with Bertha, and once again, frustration takes over him.
That little Cecil in the memory couldn't even understand his own father's pain and suffering. That boy just pretended to be empathetic in front of Bertha, who had just lost her mother, saying empty words just to go through the motions. Cecil keeps telling himself that he knows all of this is just an illusion created by that bird. But the problem is, it's not like a normal dream where you realize you're dreaming and wake up. It's as if with every memory he watches, his very essence is being taken over by that past Cecil. And he definitely doesn't want that because it hurts too much. He finally managed to see the colors of the world, to truly feel emotions, and most importantly, to have Bertha by his side. And he doesn't want to give that up for anything. As time goes by, the memories show how Bertha changes. In this scene, she's being dressed up to look really beautiful. The maid, very polite, compliments her and says she looks wonderful, but Bertha stays silent for a moment and then blurts out that she hated it. Right at that moment, the Marquis walks into the room, asks what's going on, and Bertha complains that the maid is being really cruel and trying to embarrass her. Since the Marquis loves and spoils his daughter ridiculously, he doesn't think twice and says he'll take care of everything. He comforts Bertha and tells the maid that this is her last day there and that he never wants to see her face again. The girl runs out crying, passing right by where Cecil was. Bertha leaves with the Marquis to greet the prince, but Cecil gets curious about the whole mess with the maid and asks what happened. Bertha, as if it were nothing, answers that the maid made a mistake and got fired. Just like that. Cecil had already heard some rumors that the Marquis had changed a lot after losing his wife. The only person in the world he showed any affection to was Bertha, and over time, that just made her more and more arrogant. At least, when it came to the prince, Bertha was still very obedient, and for Cecil, that was enough. As long as she didn't cause any serious trouble, he knew it would be almost impossible to call off the engagement, so he just accepted the situation. Back to our protagonist in the present, now he's lying on the floor of this dimension, unable to move a single muscle. But there's someone crying right in front of him, begging for forgiveness. The person cries and says this is the only way he can be happy. Then someone touches his head and we're pulled into another memory, this time a little further in the future. At this point, Cecil is already the student council president, and it's the very day Bertha is about to enter the academy. He's there, playing the part of the good fiancé, bringing a bouquet of flowers, but you can tell he's really not into it. As he walks, he mutters that he's going to die of boredom if he goes there, but if he doesn't go see his fiancée, it's definitely going to cause a huge problem. And just like in the game, Cecil ends up bumping into Enderon, who seems to be following her little bird. But the look on Cecil's face is different now. He keeps staring at her intently while she talks to the bird. He asks if she's a new student. The girl gets all nervous as he approaches, but she confirms that she is. Cecil asks why she's not at the welcome party, and Enderon explains that since she's from the countryside and doesn't know anyone, she decided not to go. So she was just taking a walk with her bird. That's when Cecil pulls a flower from the bouquet that was meant for Bertha and gives it to Enderon. He says it's a gift to congratulate her on joining the academy, accompanied by a very kind smile. Enderon is completely frozen, staring at him in awe. Zeno even finds it odd, because it's not normal for the prince to show interest in anyone, and that makes Cecil quite thoughtful. In this way, the events of the story kept following the game's script. One day, Cecil went to take a look at some roses, at Zeno's suggestion, since the director's wife loved those flowers. As he walked, he wondered why people made such a big deal out of that garden. In his view, if the plants are well taken care of course they're going to look beautiful. There's really no mystery to it. But it was right there that he found Enderon sleeping, leaning against a tree. So he walked over and told her she shouldn't be sleeping there. The girl hears him and slowly starts to open her eyes.
And when she realizes it's the prince, she gets totally startled. Cecil, as cool as can be, just comments that a lady shouldn't be showing her face sleeping like that. Enderon, dying of embarrassment, explains that she thought the place was beautiful and comfortable, and she just ended up falling asleep. She apologizes, but Cecil doesn't care about that. He says she just did something really interesting and out of the ordinary, like the way she jumped back when she saw him. He asked if she also came to see the roses. Enderon confirms and says that it was right after seeing the flowers that she leaned against the tree and dozed off. That's when Cecil asks her name, and she introduces herself as Junia and Darren. Cecil also introduces himself simply as Cecil. This makes Enderon curious, since that's the prince's name. When he confirms that he really is the prince, it finally clicks for her and she's even more shocked, making her apologize right away. But Cecil stays calm about it, saying it's enough if she remembers him from now on. But as a sort of reward, he asks her to keep him company for a walk in the garden. He had also come to see the roses, but it would definitely be more fun with her around. Hearing this, Enderon's delighted and accepts the invitation right away. And by the way, Bertia was watching this whole scene from a distance. Time kept passing and the events of the story unfolded, with Cecil starting to have more and more fun with the country girl. But it was right around this time that Bertia started acting even more cruelly. She went straight after Enderon and did everything she could to hurt the girl. Cecil watched the whole scene from the sidelines, and up until then it let it go because her family could be useful. But in his mind, she was trying to break the new toy he had just found, so now he was going to have to put an end to her plans. That's when he approached Miguel for the first time and asked about all the wrong things Marquis Noches had been doing. At first, Miguel stayed quiet and was pretty curt. He said that was just the prince's imagination and was about to leave, but Cecil told him the truth and explained that he just wanted to save him. He knew that Miguel was being threatened and helping the Marquis against his will. After all, someone as serious and honest as Miguel would never get involved in shady schemes on his own. The prince showed that he understood all the suffering Miguel was going through. Thanks to that honest conversation, the two of them really connected, and Cecil started working behind the scenes. Time flew by, and little by little, Enderon stopped being that country girl and started carrying herself with a lot of elegance. Cecil thought this was pretty funny, since before she was always running around chasing after a bird, a memory that made her die of embarrassment. This meeting of theirs happened just one day before the graduation party. The prince's intention was to give her the famous yellow dress, all to make sure she would be by his side at the decisive moment. There, Cecil held her hand, but Enderon pulled back, remembering that he was already engaged to Bertia. Even so, Enderon couldn't hide her feelings anymore. She gathered her courage and said that even if she had to face Bertia, she wanted to confess her love for the prince. And that's exactly what she did. Cecil couldn't contain his emotions and gave her a tight hug. Up until that moment, he thought he only felt curiosity and a bit of affection for her, but now he was starting to feel a different kind of warmth taking over his chest. What he didn't realize was that the bird was manipulating his feelings so that all of this would happen. We reached graduation day. Unlike last time, Marquis Noches avoided the king, and the king himself was without his wife. The ceremony went on as usual until it was Cecil's turn to speak, and he announced that there was a lady who wanted to make a confession in front of everyone. He called Enderon up to the front. Bertia was frustrated, confused by everything. But then Enderon revealed that Bertia tried to push her down the stairs. She said she was locked in a storage room and that Bertia used other people to attack her indirectly. Bertia tried to play dumb at the time, but Cecil quickly stepped in to back up Enderon's story. He said he had all the evidence in hand and that she wasn't the only victim in the salon. According to him, a lot of people there had suffered prejudice because of their social class and had gone through horrible situations at Bertia's hands. With that encouragement, he asked anyone who had gone through that to step forward and show some courage. You could really feel the weight of the moment. A bunch of people started raising their hands. With such clear evidence, he asked if Bertia had anything to say in her defense. But Bertia didn't lose her composure. She looked straight at him and said that even if the evidence was real, what was going to happen? As the daughter of a marquis and the future queen, nobles of lower rank shouldn't provoke her wrath. Cecil found that answer really interesting because the solution was simple. Just take those privileges away from her. Right then and there, he exposed that Marquis Douglas was involved in a scheme with Count Blader and other nobles, and that he had clear evidence of it. He said that the king was already aware of everything too. The Marquis was in trouble, and the guards led him away. Bertia despaired when she saw her father taken. After all, a criminal's daughter could never be queen. Seizing the moment, Cecil announced their engagement was void. She completely lost it. She screamed her father's innocence, that she'd be his queen and stand by him forever. She was acting out of control. To the Cecil from that memory, she was beyond saving. But at that peak moment, he started to hear Bertia's voice. Not this Bertia, but his real sweet Bertia, shouting his name so loudly that it made the protagonist remember absolutely everything. Enderon almost asked what was going on, but Cecil didn't even pay attention. The first thing he did was run toward that fake Bertia and give her a hug, but it was just to whisper in her ear that she wasn't his real Bertia. Cecil's willpower made all that brainwashing start to break. When he opens his eyes, he realizes he's finally out of that nightmare. The warmth he felt and that they tried to steal from him is still there. He's absolutely sure he'd take a world where his Bertia exists 1,000 times over, and that brings him so much joy that in that moment he can't hold back and starts to cry. He gets up and begs for it all to finally end. And he says this directly to Pi, who is actually a little boy there crying and asking why all of this is happening. Cecil looks at him and notices that the boy is kind of transparent, which means his end is near. Most likely, this whole dimension will disappear along with him. Through his tears, Pi just can't understand why Cecil won't choose Enderon. Apparently, the boy has his own reasons for wanting.
He wants Cecil to stay with her, but for Cecil, that's completely impossible. Honestly, after everything they've done, the only thing he feels for them now is deep disappointment. But Pai starts telling him that Andarin told him the prince was her destined knight, and that it was only natural for them to fall in love. The only thing she was trying to do was guide Cecil toward the right future. But Cecil asks a pointed question. Who would love someone who only hurts others to get what they want? Pai answers that if they hadn't done all that, Andarin wouldn't be happy. Cecil makes it clear that actually it was precisely because she did all that she couldn't be happy. If she had just accepted that fate had changed and tried to make people genuinely like her, she wouldn't have ended up alone in the situation she's in now. And even if not everything turned out exactly the way she wanted, she still could have been happy. The big problem is that she didn't think about her own actions, and Pai's blind support only made her even more arrogant. That's why she ended up losing everything. Cecil tells Pai that when he disappears from there, she'll be truly alone. And as expected, hearing that really hurts the poor spirit. P tells the prince that he knows they've caused a lot of trouble, but asks for at least one last thing. It's just a message he wants to leave for her. Cecil doesn't see a problem with that. After all, in the end, they also helped him understand some important things. The words little P wants to share are simple. Even if she can't see him anymore, he'll always be by her side. And that's something Cecil understands perfectly. Besides, at that moment, he's able to see a fragment of the memory from when Andarin found Pai. They were the spirit's own memories, and it actually touches Cecil's heart as he watches everything. That's when Cecil asks Zeno for a bit of power, because he wants to deliver this little bit of hope that Pai left for her. From there on, the rest will depend solely on her choices. So our protagonist starts to open his eyes in the real world, only to be met with total chaos. The girls are screaming, Bertia's dad looks like a madman in the background, and he has no idea what's going on. The girls warn Cecil that if he doesn't get up right now, Bertia's gonna shave her head like a monk. He's pretty confused by this, but then he looks at Bertia, who looks like a lunatic begging for a pair of scissors, and realizes they're not joking. The girl even asks to borrow a sword right then and there, because she's got it in her head that she needs to become a nun. And all of this happened because when Cecil wouldn't wake up, she freaked out and thought the best solution was to go to a convent. Our protagonist comes over to let everyone know that everything's fine now. When he does that, Bertia doesn't even understand what just happened, but she immediately throws herself at him for a hug. The poor thing was really scared, and now she says that since Buddha kept his part of the deal, she also has to keep her promise and leave with him. But Cecil tells her she can't do that. After all, she's the crown princess. Bertia doesn't get any of it, since in her mind, she should be the defeated villain. But Cecil lays it out straight and says that the future she's talking about, where he ends up with the heroine, just isn't gonna happen. And the reason is that now he fully realizes that Bertia is the only person he can be with. Even so, she panics thinking about the future that awaits her. Our hero still doesn't fully understand what's going on in this woman's head, but for now he asks everyone else to leave so they can talk alone. Before everyone leaves for good, he asks a question. What did they see before he passed out? The group answers that all they saw was the crystals breaking because of a shining bird that appeared and disappeared right after. And that Birch's snake also helped, so that the shards wouldn't hurt anyone. Miguel was really confused about all this until now, but suddenly realizes that it could have been a spirit of light. Cecil confirms it, which leaves the two of them deep in thought and very worried, since they both know very well what these spirits are. Feel the tension in the air. Our hero warns that there will be trouble if the others find out what that really was, so he asks them to make sure no one knows what actually happened. Now that he's finally alone with Bertia, he wants her to tell him everything at once. He tells her that no matter how much she resists, the situation won't change at all, but maybe the future could be different. He thinks for a moment and then gets angry, telling her not to lie. He lays it all out, saying that if he can't be with the heroine, he won't care at all about the kingdom or even his own future. This leaves Bertia so desperate that the poor thing starts to cry. Our protagonist says he doesn't understand what makes her cry like that, but assures her that he's not lying. He wants to make this kingdom a better place, and he wants to do it for the sake of their future together. That's why he asks her to trust him. This time, Bertia gives up pretending not to understand and decides to tell everything. And that's how we find out something we already suspected. At the graduation party, Bertia was supposed to be condemned, and the heroine was supposed to choose her romantic partner. From that point on, the individual routes begin, and each person's story unfolds. If the level of affinity between the heroine and her chosen one was high before the party, He would send her a dress or accessories in the color of his hair, unlocking him as a romanceable character. Literally everything depends on the color of the heroine's outfit. Inderon, for example, showed up in a yellow dress, which was exactly what Cecil was supposed to have sent her. But to begin with, Cecil didn't send any dress at all. The crazy girl got one on her own and thought everything would work out if he chose her, which was pretty silly on her part. However, Cecil did actually give a dress as a gift, but it was to Bertia, who now struts around everywhere in his colors. The big thing is that in Prince Cecil's route, if the heroine had chosen him, everyone would be happy, except for Bertia, of course. But in the other routes, the story takes a different turn. Cecil even asks her not to feel bad, because if what she said is true, we're not talking about this Cecil here. What she's about to tell is the future of the Prince Cecil from the game she played. To start, let's see what Balt's life would be like. The guy would come in desperate, telling our protagonist that the neighboring kingdom was attacking. He wanted an urgent meeting with the king and the generals, but Cecil, instead of being scared, had a smile on his face. That's when things get ugly. A war broke out and the kingdom fought tooth and nail. Suddenly, Prince Cecil would show up on the front lines and turn the tide. Balth was always by his side, protecting and fighting, but he was getting worn out physically and mentally. That's when the heroine comes in to comfort the guy. Indram would get excited to hear that they won the first battle and that he was okay. But despite the victory, Balt was crushed inside because there were so many losses and wounded. The soldiers were dropping like flies and there was nothing he could do. Even so, Indram tried to soothe his heart, telling him it wasn't his fault and that she was really proud of the warrior he was. In the end, under Cecil's orders, they managed to defeat the neighboring kingdom. But that didn't put an end to the war. Cecil said it was all for the good of the kingdom. He increased the defenses and strengthened the nation to start invading other countries. They kept at it non-stop until something bizarre happened. In one of the battles, Cecil started acting like a madman. They had already secured the victory, but he wanted the enemy to continue their struggle. The invaded country was terrified, seeing him as a maniac addicted to combat, and ended up retreating. His behavior was really frowned upon. Balth warned him that he should stop throwing himself at the enemy army, but to Cecil, that was normal. The enemy general was skilled, and he wanted to test his own limits. The prince just said he'd be careful not to get himself killed, and that was enough for him. He was proud of himself, and that made Balth furious, because the prince seemed to ignore the mountain of problems and losses caused by him. In Cecil's mind, the math added up. If he lost 100 but saved 1,000, it was all good. He thought that as long as he compensated the families, the problem would go away. And now he had to rack his brain to replace the soldiers. That was the last straw. Bolt realized something terrifying. The prince treated people's lives, and his own, like mere pawns. He felt totally indifferent toward himself and everyone else. It was bizarre because Cecil only seemed truly excited in the middle of combat. That made Balt have a lot of doubts, but with the support of the heroine and his friends, he kept fulfilling his duty every day. In the end, the kingdom ended up unifying the neighboring countries, and that's how Balt and the heroine were able to live in peace. Now our hero understands that the amount of destruction needed for them to be happy was enormous. He also realizes that his version of himself in that world never really cared about anything, not even about himself. Since war was the only thing that caught his attention, he treated everyone like pawns. He finally understands why Bertha wanted so badly for him to be with the heroine. In the end, besides destroying the country, he would have ended up getting hurt himself. Cecil feels like a fool for having judged Bertha the wrong way, now that he knows how big her heart is. Right at that moment, she tries to calm him down, saying that this is the saddest route of all, and asks him not to worry. She says that in the other routes, things don't end well for him either. Sometimes he locks himself up at home, flees the country, gets eliminated, or simply disappears. For our protagonist, that doesn't sound good at all either. In Cham's route, for example, one day Prince Cecil just disappears. He leaves a letter for his younger brother, saying he's tired of royalty, and leaves the throne in his hands. Right after that, the king suffers a fatal attack. The neighboring kingdom attacks and Cham gets scared, but the heroine supports him. They win the first battle and manage to get a happy ending, but the war goes on. In the present, Cecil agrees that his little brother has no qualities to be king at all. Now, in Kron's route, the story's pretty interesting. The guy spent years on a research project, but Cecil showed up and solved everything in no time, became obsessed with gunpowder, and locked himself in the lab. The kingdom is attacked, but Kron creates a powerful weapon with gunpowder, wins the war, and marries Enderon. In Miguel's route, the prince disappears and becomes a spy in the neighboring kingdom, attacking from the inside while Miguel attacks from the outside. They destroy the rival country, Miguel marries Enderon, but peace is not guaranteed. And in Carlos's route, Cecil is out of the picture right at the beginning. Carlos and Enderon investigate, avenge the prince, win the war, and end up together. The big truth is that, deep down, Bertha thinks none of these endings were truly happy, and it's easy to see why. In every route where he doesn't end up with Enderon, a whole war breaks out. That's why the girl insisted so much on keeping the story on track. Besides that, Cecil gets to know himself. That route where he disappeared early on, for example, definitely happened because he no longer had the will to live. In Cham's route, he put the burden on his brother because he didn't care about people. In Kron's route, he stole the research just for fun. In Miguel's route, he acted alone because he didn't know how to trust anyone. All of this fits perfectly with who he was before he met Bertha. That's why he confesses to the girl that he's an even worse person than he thought. Bertha quickly shuts that down, saying that's all a lie, and that he's nothing like the prince from the game. The real Cecil has a huge heart, cares about others, and isn't some
That interrupted graduation party ended without any problems, thanks to the people who took care of everything while Bertie and the main character were talking. The next day we follow Cecil, who is about to decide Enderon's punishment. And the girl is still off in La La Land thinking Cecil chose her, but he just asks her to sit down, because this is a serious conversation. Enderon keeps living in her fantasy, swearing that Cecil is into her because of the divine light. But he tells her the truth. He already knew that it was her light spirit that got out of control, and that her pet bird was actually a spirit. That's why Cecil explains that spirits aren't that common, but there are plenty of them, and a lot of people live with them, so that doesn't make her special. Enderon doesn't buy it, after all, even in the original game they weren't mentioned. But that's when he explains, to keep them from being used as political weapons, only the highest ranking nobles know about them, and nobility doesn't guarantee the safety of anyone who goes around spreading the secret, so she better watch out. The scene cuts to Bertia, who's visiting Cecil, super curious to find out what happened. Cecil picks the girl up like she's a princess and says he's gonna tell her everything, which takes us back to that conversation. Cecil tells Enderon that the spirit of light showed the future she thought was right from her memories, and she thinks they're finally gonna understand her. But Cecil is blunt. If that's her idea of happiness, he'd rather stay far away from it. Enderon snaps back that it's only because he's still a puppet without feelings, since they're not even dating, but Cecil shuts her down. At least he's not that puppet anymore, and that's why he called her there, because his true destined maiden is Bertia, who was the one who made him human. That really gets under Enderon's skin. To her, none of this makes sense, because it was Bertia who messed up the story. And Cecil agrees. The Bertia he knows is very different from the one Enderon expected. She tries to say that this is her true self, but Cecil points out that there's someone else who's also very different, and points right at her. Enderon swears she followed the script exactly, so she doesn't understand where she went wrong. The hero insists that she did change. At first, Bertia was just a country girl who didn't know how to behave in high society, but by graduation, she had become a true lady. But Enderon doesn't follow the rules, has no class at all, and Cecil even found out that the etiquette teacher lost her patience with her during tea lessons. That's why he drops the million-dollar question, what did she learn in these 4 years? Being the crown princess means that every move represents the entire kingdom, and any slip-up is a public embarrassment, so she shouldn't think she can handle such a heavy role. Enderon tells him to shut up, she's lost because this event didn't exist in the original game and she refuses to accept it. To top it off, she starts desperately asking where Pai is, because if she's with him, everyone will have to admit that she's special. But then things get ugly. Cecil reveals that that little bird doesn't exist anymore. His life was snuffed out when he tried to protect her from her own madness. And this is nothing more than the result of her actions because of the future she tried to force. The news devastates Enderon. She screams for Pai, but the little bird doesn't answer, and that destroys her. Even when no one else believed her, Pai was the only one who never left her side, and it's the first time Cecil has seen her break down like this.
but he keeps his composure and says the conversation ends here. But before that, he delivers a message that Pai himself asked him to give. Even if she couldn't see him anymore, he would always be by her side. Andoran finally breaks down in tears, and Cecil puts a necklace on her, which holds a fragment of Pai's soul. Right before the spirit's core faded away, he managed to save a part of it using Zeno's power. It's not much, but his essence still lives on there, and now he says the rest will be settled in the audience chamber. At that moment, as punishment for all the trouble, they decide to send Andoran to a convent, and Cecil had a back and forth with his father to choose which one. The king was hesitant because he didn't really trust his son's ideas, but in the end, he let him decide. Andoran approaches and the king announces her punishment. The Baron's family has cut all ties with her, so now she's just a commoner and will be sent to a convent, but he leaves one choice up to her. One option is a convent in the far north with terrible weather where some people can't handle it and end up dying. The other option is a warmer convent in the south, 3 days from the capital. The thing is, in the north they worship the divine light, and it's said that the power there is much stronger, so strong that with enough faith, even someone who's already gone could come back. Cecil believes that the spirit of light sacrificed itself for her, so now it's her turn to decide how much she's willing to sacrifice for him. This leaves Andoran deep in thought, but she can't get Pai out of her mind. In the end, she stands her ground and chooses the north. And so, she leaves, and the protagonist just gives a silent goodbye to the girl who once swore she was the great heroine, but in the end, wasn't anyone special, just an ordinary girl named Andoran. And this is the story the hero tells Bertia, who is filled with pride for Andoran, thinking she's heading north to pray and help the wounded spirit. Bertia only thinks this way because Cecil glossed over the facts to put her at ease. The tactic worked, but it annoys Cecil because it seems like that's the only thing she cares about, even when she's in his arms. He realizes that if things keep going this way, he'll have to be a bit bolder. At that moment, Kuro and Zeno show up in a panic, and the problem is that he can't get rid of the spirits. So he plays it off, says he was just joking, and that he'll save the moment for when they're married. Bertia gets even redder, but Zeno bursts out laughing because Cecil is there acting all charming, even though the scene looks like a pile of turtles stacked on top of each other. Later, when they're alone again, Cecil tells Bertia that they'll finally be able to get married in peace, and just thinking about it makes her die of embarrassment. Bertia confesses that she spent her whole life preparing to be the worst villain possible and has no idea if she's cut out to be a queen. Cecil assures her that she's gonna do great. Bertia, mixing embarrassment with excitement, shouts that now that the tables have turned, she's gonna give it her all because she wants Cecil to be a great king. She takes on the responsibility of being the anomaly that changed the story and promises to dedicate herself 100% to it, and that takes a huge weight off Cecil's shoulders. Even with the story turned upside down, the ending stays the same. He takes her hand and kisses it, because for him, the most precious thing in the world is having his destined maiden by his side. Bertie is completely smitten, but she couldn't be happier. But there's a little detail that Cecil has kept hidden until now, and the time is coming for him to come clean, the secret about the blood that runs in his veins. That same night, the protagonist also talked with his father, who congratulated him on his graduation. The old man mentions that Endarian was a huge headache, but now that problem is gone, and the next thing will be organizing the wedding. Cecil takes it in stride and says he's excited for that part. That makes his father proud, but he wants to know if Cecil is really having fun and if he thinks he can be happy with her. Cecil answers without hesitation that he has absolutely no doubt. There isn't another woman in the world who could make him happier. He even says he loves her so much, he'd be willing to destroy an entire country just for her, which makes his father burst out laughing. But Cecil takes the opportunity to turn the question back around about Tojin's destined maiden and drops a bombshell. He wants to know what his father knows about people like him. The question catches the king off guard and he becomes visibly tense. Cecil comes right out and says he already knows this was kept secret, and that even though he figured it out on his own, his father's panic just confirmed everything. That's why he expects his father to lay all the cards on the table. The king, almost forced to, ends up admitting that his son's suspicions are probably correct. From time to time, gifted children are born into the royal family, like Cecil. But in exchange for this incredible talent, they lack basic human emotions and almost nothing holds their attention. That's why they desperately search for something that can spark even a little emotion. And when they find it, they become obsessed. Legend says this is inherited from the blood of King Tujin, who founded the kingdom and is known as the Hero King. But in reality, the guy was just obsessed with war. He only got the title because of the woman who became his wife, Queen Annie. They got engaged to keep the peace between the tribes? Since he was a kid, Tujin was a total genius, but he never cared about anything and only spent his time playing with Annie because she was always challenging him to all sorts of competitions. But the only thing that really got his blood pumping was war games. And when the little pieces on the board weren't fun anymore, a real war broke out between the tribes. As an adult, he led the armies and kept conquering everything, but he always wanted more. That's when Annie stood up to him, looked him straight in the eyes, and warned that if he kept taking lives for no reason, she would start to hate him. When he heard that for the first time in his life, Tujin felt the impact and suddenly stopped going to battles. Cecil deduces that she was Tojin's destined maiden, and the king agrees. It was Annie who made him change his plans and dedicate himself to building a peaceful nation, and that's why they called him the Hero King. And our hero thinks that if Bertia said the same thing to him, he would also do whatever she asked without a second thought. The king continues, every 100 centuries, someone exactly like Tojin is born into the royal family, and these people are a double-edged sword. If something good catches their attention, they become incredible and wise kings. But if it's for the worse, they turn into terrible monsters or disappear before they can do the worst. And that's what Cecil had read in a secret library full of texts from these past kings, with knowledge that hasn't even been introduced to the world yet. According to his father, as soon as he was born, the boy already understood the language long before any normal child, and that left the king in shock. He didn't want to believe that his own son would be one of those kings. Cecil asks if his father was disappointed, but the king denies it. For royalty, having a smart heir is always a win. What he really felt was fear, because he just wanted his son to be happy and experience the emotions of life. That's why he decided to take a risk. And that's where Bertia comes into the story. She's intense, kind, and shows everything she feels, the exact opposite of the protagonist. The king bet that if she stayed close to Cecil, something might awaken in him, and he hit the nail on the head. Ever since he met her, something in Cecil seemed to genuinely have fun. The king remembers the relief he felt on a birthday when Cecil asked for a Luana leaf seedling as a gift, a plant that, by chance, later helped contain an epidemic. Cecil realizes that he unintentionally drove his parents crazy, but his father tells it like it is, that's normal when you're a parent. And if he wants to make up for it, he has to be the best son he can be now. The hero jokes and asks if his dad is going to dump all the kingdom's boring work on him. And the king laughs, and that's the advantage of having a genius son. For Cecil, that's no problem. As long as he's with Bertia, he'll give it his all to make everything work out. In short, the kingdom's future is entirely in Bertia's hands, even though she has no idea about it. After a few more glasses, Cecil's father passes out from sleep and the protagonist stays there lost in thought. He knows that if he told Bertia the whole story about royal blood, with her heart of gold, he could keep her by his side forever. But he doesn't want the girl he loves to become a puppet who just bows her head and says amen to everything. He fell in love precisely because of her craziness, and he wants to be the guy she chose of her own free will. At that moment, Cecil's mother comes into the room complaining that her husband is hopeless. But Cecil reassures her, saying that he only drank like that because he got a huge weight off his shoulders, and his mother immediately understands that her son already knows everything. She gets emotional, gives him a kiss, and assures him that they are incredibly proud to have him as their son. But she warns, if he makes Bertia cry, she won't forgive him. With that said, she leaves, dragging her husband out with the help of a butler, and Cecil can only feel immense gratitude for having the parents he does. 2 more years go by, and now we see Bertia, all excited, making plans for the big wedding. But apparently, her brother isn't at all interested in letting that happen easily. That was the end of the episode. Comment the word Part 12 so I know you've made it this far and want to see how this drama unfolds. I'll give your comment a heart. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter, because the hype is just getting started. Without further ado, Rebobina says goodbye and see you next time.